The busy agenda, so we will start right away. Let me start by asking board members if there are any conflicts of interest under the Municipal Conflicts of Interest Act. And let me say that I have one on relation to item number 18 that I declared at a previous meeting, and I will step away again. And Councillor Lee, as vice chair, if I may turn. Actually, I'll turn it over to you at item number 17, if that's all right. And Mayor Tory, you have...
On 18A and B, Mr. Chair, I have, again, similar to the last time this was in front of us, have an interest to declare in respect of some ongoing involvement with the Rogers family. So I'll absent myself from the discussion as well.
Okay. Any other? Hearing none, thank you. May I have confirmation of the minutes of the meeting of May 19th, 2016? Motion to approve. Mr. Jeffers, seconded by Councillor Lee. All in favor? Any contrary? Carried. So we'll go through the agenda here. There's a presentation, obviously, on numbers 3 and 4. Number 5, motion to receive, or are there questions on it? I think we will hold that. Yes, there will be. And Councillor Carroll, I know, has questions. Motion, item number 6, the external, the mental health advisor, and I will hold that. I have some points I want to make on that. Item number 7, the Office of the Ombudsman's Review, TTC Special Constables, motion to receive. Mayor Tory and Dr. Nuria, seconding. All in favor? Any contrary? It's carried. Item number 8, we hold as a deputation. Item number 9 is the 2015 annual report, police towing contracts. There is a written submission. Yes, and I will have a question, I'm reminded. Thank you. So we will hold that. Item number 10 is a deputation. Item number 11, a deputation. Okay, that's been canceled. So the item number 11 is the City of Toronto Council recommendation, re-school crossing guards. May I have a motion to approve? Councillor Lee, seconded. Dr. Nuria, all in favor? Carried unanimously. Item number 12, the City of Toronto, that deputation's been removed too, has it? No. Okay, so there is a deputation on that. We'll hold it. Item number 13, the 2015 annual report, auxiliary members, termination of employments, or appointments rather, motion to approve. Mayor Tory, seconded. Mr. Jeffers, all in favor? Any contrary? Carried unanimously. Item number 14, the Special Fund, Canadian Association of Police Governance 2016 Annual Conference, motion to approve. It's $5,000. Dr. Nuria, seconded. Mr. Jeffers, all in favor? Any contrary? Carried. Item number 15, Special Fund Seniors Community Consultative Committee, motion to approve. Councillor Lee, second. Mr. Jeffers, all in favor? Any contrary? Carried unanimously. Item number 16, Special Fund 2015 Annual Report, Activities and Expenditures of Consultative Committees, and request to reallocate funds to a Disabilities Community Consultative Committee. Total amount $29,000. Motion to approve. Councillor Lee, seconded. Dr. Nuria, all in favor? Any contrary? Carried unanimously. Item number 17, we're holding. Item number 18, we're holding. I think there's some other items to do with it. Item number 19 is attached to item number 3, and so we'll hold that. Item number 20 is amendment special fund request, funds in support of the Transformational Task Force. Motion to approve. Councillor Lee, seconded. Mr. Jeffers, all in favor? Any contrary? Carried unanimously. Item number 21, a request for special fund again, International Auxiliary Conference and Toronto Police Service Auxiliary 60th Anniversary. Motion to approve. Councillor Lee, seconded. Dr. Nuria, all in favor? Any contrary? Carried unanimously. Item number 22, Special, a request for the special funds 10th anniversary, the Yippee Gala. That's the Youth in Policing Initiative Gala. A motion to approve, and again, it's a $60,000 amount. Councillor Lee, seconded Mayor Tory. All in favor? Any contrary? Carried unanimously. Item number 23 is again a request from special funds. Just Think First campaign. Motion to approve. Councillor Lee again, seconder, Mr. Jeffers. All in favor? Any contrary? Carried unanimously. Item number 24, request for special funds reimbursement of travel expenses for members of the Mental Health External Advisory Committee. That is related to item number 6 on our list. But this is just a motion to approve the expense amount of those committee members being here. Motion moved by Councillor Lee, seconded by Mayor Tory. All in favor? Any contrary? Carried. And finally, item number 25, a senior project manager for the Transformational Task Force change initiative contract. I think I will hold this just for a presentation. We will take it out of order after we hear from the Transformational Task Force. So with that, let us go back. And the first is the Transformational Task Force. And we'll hear from, perfect. So let me just to give you some background. You'll recall that at the December board meeting, we received the KPMG report, and that was really the culmination of a number of years of discussion about modernization of the Toronto Police, starting really in some ways with the 2011 budget discussion and the chief's internal review, but recognizing that there were a number of other reviews and discussions. The board in 2014 asked KPMG to come in and evaluate the CIOR report, but also to make some suggestions of areas that we could look at to improve. They did that in the December report. The board had considered that and met as an offsite to discuss KPMG and broader terms of recommendations. At the December board meeting, we recommended the board establish a task force to be chaired by the chief and myself to report back at this meeting as an interim report and with a final report due at the end of the year. So that has been done. We have been had a great deal of work done, and I'm going to ask two of the committee members, Michelle DiEmanuele, who is the CEO of the Trillium Health Network, and Greg Watt, who is a staff sergeant on the Toronto Police Service, to come forward and present the report. I think they're here. Michelle, Greg, thank you. First of all, thank you for all the work that you've done to date. Welcome, and thank you for being here.
Thank you, and let me just acknowledge my fellow task force members who are at the table. We'll take you through a slide presentation and then happy to entertain questions. The first slide, if I can have that up on the screen. Many of you around this table will know this journey over the last decades. In the report, there is a listing of some 50 reports that have been done on the police services in different slices. Some from a service perspective, some from a budget perspective, some from an incident perspective. And so it was important, I think, that we acknowledge the history to what got us here today. And that was something that the task force did spend some time both reflecting on those reports. Some of those reports, as you know, would have had public consultations associated with them. But there are a couple of points that we want to make that I think are important around where this journey now continues. And that the first one is, you'll notice that there are red and blue flags. Some of these reports were almost exclusively driven from external sources, and some of them were almost exclusively driven from internal sources. At the very end there, you'll see a flag with red and blue. That would be our task force. And I think it's important to acknowledge the partnership that has occurred around this table. a partnership that I guess symbolically both Staff Sergeant Watts and I are representing in terms of the community members and the service members. But it is a partnership that I think this board made a decision with respect to how they wish that task force to be constructed. And I think that it was a defining moment and a special moment when you think about moving forward. So I do just want to acknowledge that. Also, as you know, we have a new chief, and that new leadership always represents new opportunities. And so there is an opportunity here. There is a moment here that really the task force took a great sense of responsibility in what we were being asked. And so I just really wanted to impress that upon on the board. Next slide, please. So why now? We've been on this journey, obviously, but why now? What's different? What's going on? And I think it's important. We all know that this city is changing. It's growing. It's more complex. We also know that citizens expect their public services to be there when they're needed. They expect them to be reliable, to be strong, to be visible, to be trusted, but also to reflect those that they serve. We also, through our deliberations, know that this model of policing is mismatched to the demands in that changing complex city that we now serve. And so that model, that outdated model, needs to be refreshed, needs to be modernized. The lack of focus on the needs of community, the evolving information world that we live in, the evolving technology world that we live in. That complexity was reflected as we did our deliberations. We also were highly respectful of the need for prudent fiscal management, and that our cities have changed not just in their complexity, but in how they've been funded throughout this country. And finally, as I've mentioned, the new leadership in our organization, in the services. And so that all together really did present this opportunity for moving forward. I won't, in the next slide, I won't go through the task force mandate. You're well aware of it. Again, just to acknowledge that there were some community members of this task force. I want to acknowledge my colleagues. I also want to acknowledge the service that provided a great deal of support to us in so many different ways. This was an all-in proposition, and for the last 90 days, 120 days, we have been all out working to produce this interim report. Next slide, please. This slide I want to spend a little bit of time on. Although it may seem very process-oriented, I think it's important to understand how we came about deliberating on our work and drawing some of our interim conclusions. First and foremost, the legislative frameworks that the services must operate within were considered, and we're also very mindful that those frameworks are under consideration at the provincial level. So we will take that into consideration as well as we move forward into our final report. I've outlined some 50 previous reports. All of that was taken into consideration. There was an abundance of analytics and data that the service provided. These are knowledgeable, dedicated people to this area, whether it was decision support, whether it was individuals with 30, 40 years experience. We had the benefit of skilled, knowledgeable people supporting this task force. From there, that research component, we spent some time debating our principles and thinking through what was really going to guide us as we started to sift through the numbers of opportunities that we had and really coming to some sense of priority. So I'll be sharing those with you in a few minutes. From there, setting out goals. Of course, every plan has to be sustainable, and so we spent some time on that fiscal sustainability. Finally, all of that wrapped up into an action plan on creating a new model and a strategy. So the next slide is really the roadmap, that guide. We refer to it affectionately as our all-in-one, so that this really was in front of us as we began to deliberate on the actions. So let me unpack it for you a little bit. Our mission is community safety. Community safety. We all know that at the heart of this city are neighborhoods and communities, and that this service is to service them. Principles. There are some founding principles of policing worldwide, and those principles embrace the concepts of public approval, trust, behaviors that are acceptable, the prevention of crime, and I want to read this last one, embracing and serving all of our citizens, all of our citizens. And so we took that grounding set of thoughts and we modernized, we moved, we evolved in our thinking and started to talk about these 4 concepts, which really have become that basis by which many of our decisions have been made. Active accountability and trusted. Active accountability. Accountability, standing up and saying, I'm accountable, although hard, does not in any way connote the kind of process necessary to get there. It is a process accountability, one where those involved have to come to some level of agreement and understanding of what it means to both be accounted for and to account. Trusted and engaged. Trusted and engaged. The importance of relationships, approachability, inclusive and collaborative, partnerships, the importance of partnerships, and when speaking about community safety, the network of partnerships necessary to create a great city for city building. Sustainable and affordable. People have spent a lot of time, historically and through the last several months, building a plan of action. It's a plan that is built from a perspective, but also from a modeling perspective. We'll have more to say about that. I'll turn it over to Oh, I'm doing goals, aren't I? Okay. So let me talk to you about our 3 goals. And these really have been how we have organized the actions and the plan that we've put forward. Simply put, we believe that the public would like our services to be where they are most needed. Secondly, that if we believe in community safety, we believe in embracing partnerships. And thirdly, a recognition that our city is more complex, our world is more complex, and that we need to be able to respond and embrace those changes as they arise. Those are the 3 goals that have guided us, and as Staff Sergeant Watts walks you through the various activities and actions, you'll see that they all are organized in a way to help advance these 3 goals.
Thanks, Michelle. So Michelle has taken you through our mission, our principles, and our goals. And she's also mentioned that this transformation is not just about what we're doing, but more importantly, how we're going to do it and how we're going to accomplish these goals. So in order to do this, we've identified and built 5 transformational building blocks, as you can see on the screen. The first, we started with community safety. Michelle's already talked about that. Our mission is community safety, and the task force was guided by this concept and put it at the center of all of the discussions. And anything we talked about, we said, does it make our community safer? And it really speaks to how we reconnect with our communities in new ways. Secondly, the concept of moving from primary to priority response, which I'm going to talk about in more detail in a bit, really complements this reconnection by focusing our efforts on priority calls for service, where there's a public safety need, while also enhancing our ability to respond to non-emergencies through new and innovative ways. The task force then took a real hard look at the service's physical and cyber footprints, and specifically ways to extend our reach into our communities more effectively and in a broader sense. And although the task force spent a considerable amount of time looking at our fiscal reality and how to effectively manage taxpayer funds, the goal of this has always been transformation. And our final building block speaks to culture change. And I'm going to talk about that in depth in a bit. And it's basically the underpinning of our vision and the enabler of all of our recommendations. So our first building block, community safety. Like I said, it was at the centerpiece of everything that we did and all of our discussions. And although the new model will take time to develop, and it will require intensive discussion with the public and our own service members, we envision a service that is part of our communities, where officers work within our 140 neighborhoods as problem solvers, embedded in our neighborhoods. And that through the adoption of new technologies, our officers will be able to get out of their cars and interact with residents in new and exciting ways. We're also recommending that the service improve its capabilities related to data information and analysis to better inform where we are needed most, in what capacity we are needed, and with whom we can partner with. Finally, the task force is recommending that the service disband the Toronto Anti-Violence Intervention Strategy, TAVIS. Although the 2012 remodeling of this program has been very successful in reducing violent crime, there have been some unfortunate unintended consequences, specifically with regard to a diminished trust between the police and residents, despite good intentions, especially youth and racialized communities. The task force believes that the redeployment of these officers to other important functions will assist us in meeting our goal of community safety. Okay, so what does primary to priority response mean? And it really speaks to our current model, moving to more of a preventative style. Currently, we operate on primary response, and that means that all officers are dispatched in the same way, regardless of the call for service. So non-emergency calls and emergency calls are dispatched to the same officers in the same manner. The task force is recommending that we move to a priority response model, and in doing so, identify non-emergency incidents that can be better handled by other city agencies or by new and innovative ways not done before. Through using new technology, empowering our civilians within the service to do different things, and also empowering our private sector partners. We also took a look at the special events that unfold throughout our city, and we're recommending that a risk assessment tool be developed to identify which events police officers are actually required versus other options such as private security. Now, there are two recommendations within this section that will require the board to negotiate with the Toronto Police Association, and they relate to reviewing our current compressed work week schedule to better align officer deployment to demand, as well as the current requirement to have 2 officers deployed in vehicles at a certain time of the day. We're also recommending that we reduce non-emergency services that we're currently responsible for, specifically the Toronto Police Lifeguard Program, the Crossing Guard Program, and the Transit Patrol Unit. We believe that the appropriate city agency, or with regards to the Transit Patrol Unit, the TTC, will be in a better position to provide these services. Finally, within this section, the task force spent a lot of time looking at paid duties. And it's a process that's not really well understood, but does at times put the reputation of our service at risk. So once again, we're recommending that a risk assessment tool be developed so that police officers are only used in instances where their skills, authority, and training are required versus other options such as private security. So as I mentioned earlier, our physical and cyber footprints was one area that we took a hard look at. And we currently have 17 frontline police stations across our city. And that really hasn't changed for many years, but our city has become a lot more dense in areas, and our diversity is one that we're proud of, and we need to adapt. So the task force believes that we can reduce the number of frontline police stations while at the same time enhancing community safety, and also through lifting the traditional divisional boundaries and adopting the City of Toronto 140 neighborhoods, embedding officers in those neighborhoods, will allow us to be part of the community and better plan with the city and social service agencies to get the job done. And when I say reducing the physical footprint, I don't mean reducing services. Police officers do not work in buildings. Police officers do not work in cars. We work in our neighborhoods. And that's not going to change. We also understand the importance of extending our cyber reach by adopting new technologies. And what this will mean is that the public will have access to services in innovative ways online, as well as have access to data in more accessible and transparent ways. Before we talk about the fiscal realities, I want to remind the board that the task force spent a significant amount of time understanding the budget, where the greatest flexibilities may lie, and the relationship between human resources and budgetary resources. And although, as you can see, there is a rigidity to the budget due to salaries and benefits, there are still opportunities for efficiencies. But we were always guided by the fact that when we're talking about the budget, we're talking about people. So as a result, the task force has identified $100 million in savings over the next 3 years. $60 million of that will be achieved through a 3-year moratorium on hiring and promotions. $30 million will be achieved through the exploration of alternate service delivery options and shared services. And the task force is committed to finding an additional $10 million over 3 years. And again, I spoke about our physical footprint. And another piece of information that, again, is not widely known is that the Toronto Police doesn't actually own any of the buildings that we occupy. We lease them from the city. So when we close a facility, the only actual savings come in operating costs. This is, however, very significant to the city because as we give them back a building, they can repurpose it into community centers, community hubs, or sell it and use that money to get reinvested in very important city programs. So we're happy to say that in addition to the $100 million, we've identified up to $72 million in capital assets that can be returned to the city. And finally, as we continue our work towards our final report in December, there will be proposals for investments that will be required to realize this transformation. So in addition to that, we're also recommending that the service assess our current IT requirements and effectiveness, and we've contracted Ernst & Young to take on this task and provide us with advice. We're also recommending that the service explore alternate service delivery or shared services of our parking enforcement unit, our court services unit, and the way we do background screening. And finally, we're recommending that the service, in consultation with the city, implement a 911 cost recovery fee that would help recoup the costs to provide this service to all landline and wireless users. This would provide the foundation for the next generation of 911 technology and allow the service to accept text messages, photos, videos, and better location information. So our final building block speaks to culture change. And this is a very important slide. As I stated previously, it underpins our vision. Great organizations are defined by their culture, while at the same time, they're open to continuous self-assessment and innovation. We can only be successful in this transformation reflects the vision and the principles explained to you by Michelle. And it has to go throughout our entire organization. From the frontline neighborhood officer to a detective working a homicide case, right up to the ranks of our senior leaders. Every member needs to understand how their actions reflect the vision and principles. It speaks directly to how we deliver our services on the front line and how our leaders will support them in that important work and this transformation. So we're recommending that the service implement a robust talent management strategy, which will assist our members to be driven and engaged in our mission. And to support our members, we're recommending that the service partner with an academic institution to provide the best training and further professionalize policing. I mentioned innovation earlier, and we're recommending that the service embed innovation in its structure to provide the best feedback from not only the community, but our members as well. And finally, we're recommending that the service redesign the training given to new constables and existing constables as they move through the 3 progressive classifications. This training, along with a new performance evaluation standard, should reflect, once again, our mission, our vision, our principle, and our goals.
As you can see, the approach we've taken is a system approach to change and to modernizing the services. And embedded in that is also the components that help change be enabled. The importance of leadership, focusing on the processes that are necessary to underpin cultural change and also new ways of doing things. The technology adoption is embedded in this, as well as training and support around new competencies for service delivery. This is a system approach to change. It's a system approach to moving towards a transformed service. That means that in this, some things are easier than others. And one of the things that the task force would like to share with you is our belief that it needs to be taken as a system approach to change and not to look at what might be easy and put off what might seem more difficult. And so I would just, again, ask you to consider in your deliberations the totality of the recommendations. And that's not to say that there isn't opportunities for calibration as we move forward. as we learn new things, as we practice and get better at it. But it does mean that we have to constantly look at the underpinning of the methodology that we put together that I walked you through at the beginning. Always being guided by our mission, why we come to work every day, why we do this, always being guided by those 3 goals, adhering to our values and principles, and then moving forward on that action plan.
So what does this... Got to push the button. So what does this mean for the public? It actually means that with a new model and a new approach to policing, officers will be more available and accessible. Like I mentioned, embedded in our neighborhoods across our city. They'll be part of your community, and they'll take an active role in making your neighborhoods safer. It means that there will be new ways to access services, either online or through other innovative methods. And it means that the service will be a lot more transparent with regards to the data that we have. It's important to say that the police will always respond rapidly and effectively to emergency situations. And through this transformation, we'll be able to respond more effectively to neighborhood issues, local issues, priority calls for service, as well as have the surge capacity to deal with spikes in violent crime and extreme events. The task force is going to be embarking on an extensive public consultation process. The dates and times will be released very shortly, and these consultation sessions will take place across our city. And what does this transformation mean for the members of the Toronto Police Service? It means that our police officers will be more mobile as we embrace technology. Like I mentioned earlier, technology will allow us to get out of our cars and engage with our communities in ways that we haven't seen before. It means that there will be less bureaucracy and that they will be empowered as problem solvers. And it means that our processes will become less cumbersome. And it's very important to note that it means that there will be new and exciting roles for both our uniform and civilian members. Our service is one that is steeped in history and tradition, and we should be proud of this. And we should be confident that with this new leadership comes a new opportunity to modernize our operations and enhance our ability to not only work in a community, but be part of it. And again, moving forward, we will have consultation sessions to engage our members.
So we all know that a plan is only as good as its execution and implementing that plan. And so although the task force has more work to do on even the interim recommendations as we continue to deepen and examine how to move forward very effectively, we also have started to consider the overall implementation supports and levers that will be necessary for success. And those really fall into 3 main areas: the importance of people and alignment around both internal and external to the service, the importance of leadership, the members of the service, our community as a whole, and then secondly, the area of process, the kinds of feedback mechanisms that will need to be in place. I would say not just for, I hope, this task force report, but really to become embedded as part of the overall culture of a service where there is constant reflective listening, feedback mechanisms, a real culture of continuous improvement that is recognized and rewarded, and that is one that truly achieves excellence. And with that comes the importance of measurement. I talked about active accountability previously. And again, transparent reporting and progress on these initiatives. That requires continued alignment. I talked about the alignment of our public, of our governors, of our elected officials. That continued alignment is essential. If we believe this is the right plan, if we believe this aspirational goal is truly where we wish to be, then we need to continue to hold that in the center of what we do as we make our decisions in the next series of months and years ahead. So again, I'm always struck by the first slide with the many reports that have been done in the past. And again, I really do encourage you to look at those the lists in the back of that document. It's quite powerful. We do believe this is a special moment, one of alignment, one of true partnership between the service and the community. It's unprecedented. And it really is one that has led to, we believe, quite thoughtful change and a moment that we should embrace. There are new approaches in this plan. New technologies have emerged in the last decade. New leadership has emerged. And I do want to just pause at this point and thank the chief and the service for their support to this task force. It was unprecedented, and we could not have done it without that expert advice along the way. This is a systems approach. It isn't cherry picking. It isn't a slice of something. It is a complete look, knitting together the various parts of service, people, processes, technologies, etc., ensuring also that we are always mindful of the taxpayer dollar and fiscal responsibility. It's also grounded on an important why, that why of community safety. To keep the community safe, we believe it takes a community. And all of the key partners and stakeholders and the police are part of that. And so this report really does reflect that vision and those sets of values. As Greg has indicated, in the next few months, we will engage in public consultation. We will continue to look at the existing recommendations as we continue to deepen them. We will, if there are further recommendations, they will be found in our final report. But we really are talking about a multi-year plan for modernization of the services, and one that really will truly embed continuous improvement well beyond the 3 years that are depicted on this slide. And we look forward to our final report being finished in December, but tabled in January, likely at this board. And again, I just want to acknowledge the other task force members, many of who are in this room today. They have given of their time, their energy, their passion. And this is, although Greg and I are here representing that task force, this has been a collective effort, and we could not have done it without them. And again, a final acknowledgement to our two co-chairs who drove us hard and again, challenged us to be aspirational and challenged us to challenge each other along that journey. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, and the very complete and fabulous presentation of the report. And Greg and Michelle, thank you. Just before we go on to discuss, and we have some deputations, I just wanted to say a couple of things. First of all, reiterate the thanks of the task force members, and draw your attention to, I think it's Appendix A in the back of the report, where they're all listed. Many of the civilian task force members are here, and I want to thank them for all the work that they've done, because they were giving unstintingly of their time on a volunteer basis, and we were meeting sometimes several times a week, and it was spectacular. The service members did an extraordinary job in every regard. There was both and it's listed in that back report, the committee members themselves, but also an advisory group to it. And as Michelle mentioned, we had extraordinary support from the chief and the service throughout. So I really want to thank and compliment all of them and all those that participated. The second thing I want to do is point out that this is really transformational. This is the first time I think this kind of deconstruct, reconstruct has been done of the entire service any time that we could see, going back to its inception. And for that reason, we did not release it when we released the rest of the board information a week ago. But we released it. We did technical briefings yesterday, so the discussion could be today. My guidance will be that we will, there will be, as I say, a few depositions, but I think I would guide the board that we want to really heartily endorse the work of the task force, and then to defer consideration of the task force work to the July meeting, when we can hear thoughtful depositions from the public. So that's why a different approach this time. But again, I think it's a tremendous amount of work done. Michelle, Greg, thank you very much for the presentations. I know there will be discussion and questions in a minute, but before that, we have two depositions. Yes. The first is, not surprisingly, Chris Langenfeld. And Chris, Chris, you have 5 minutes. It started, Chris.
Thank you. So I had originally intended to speak on the issue of school crossing guards, but that's actually part of this report, and I'm glad to see that I don't have to argue as to why I think that should be moved out of the service. So there's a number of recommendations in the report here that I think are good ideas, and I congratulate them. I know some of them have been discussed before. The school crossing guards, lifeguards, a revision of paid duty. There's a number of things there that are excellent ideas. There's a few things, though, that as I go through this, just from last night, that raise a few questions. And one of the first things here is point 2 in the recommendations that talking about utilizing big data and things of that nature. And my concerns are what is constituting what are you considering big data? Are we talking about police tracking every credit card transaction and Presto card use and things of that nature? Because that's big data that falls under this classification of data that's available in the corporate sphere. And that's certainly not, I think, what we as a society want our police involved in. So when we first talked about this, we brought up, that was in regards to, I think, the $8.8 million budget to prepare the information systems. And at that point, the point was going to be that that was really only dealing with collecting and dealing with internal police data and to provide access to that. And that was the assurance that we got. Now this is coming up again. And so I'm very concerned that we have to have clear declaration of what exactly are police going to be using, what data are they going to be accessing, and that needs to be information that the public is well aware of, that we can argue if we don't agree with the concept. There's a few other things. I had brought up the issue of 911 comes up, and you'll remember sometime last year there was a recommendation from another area that they were wanting the province to introduce a service fee for 911 services following the example of Alberta. And I pointed out then that while Alberta doesn't have the same kind of sales taxes and tax structure that Ontario has, and I would suggest the money is there. But there's a lot of changes in here where they're talking about for the service amalgamating some of the policing issues into other areas, whether it be social services and things of that nature. And so I wonder if the appropriate thing isn't for 911 to move away from the police service to become a city-run process that's integrated with the 311 system and all of those other things in a singular environment where you have providing social services, police, emergency, all of the different aspects, and take it out of the police realm because it's really not just a policing issue. And I think then we can talk about, I don't necessarily agree that there's a justification and a need for new tax to fund a 911 system, and I certainly don't necessarily agree that the service is the appropriate vehicle for providing that. Another thing that they talk about is the use of traffic enforcement technology, and I noticed that was on one of the slides up there and got skipped over, and there was no mention of exactly what that is. The first thought that comes to mind is photo radar, and of course we brought this up before, and I've mentioned that there was a provincial government that was in power that brought in photo radar and was quickly out of power with a new government that said they were getting rid of it. So I would say generally as a society, there's a lot of people against the idea of, it comes down to technology watching us as opposed to police officers and people that are there and able to offer more than just mailing you a ticket if your vehicle goes by. So there's lots more areas. Needless to say, I would have loved to have read the $45,000 cheaper 10-page version that this started as opposed to what the printer, graphics artist, and professional writer came up with. So I'll look forward to perhaps commenting more next month, since I understand this is coming up, and I take it my time's up, sir.
You have 10 seconds, but you're right, it's up. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you.
Second, the only other deposition is Ms. Sylvia Rose from the Canadian Association of Black Educators.
Good afternoon.
Sylvia, thank you very much for coming. You've got 5 minutes, and I'll just give you a 1-minute warning, if that's okay, when you're there.
Yeah, no problem. I
Thanks.
also put a couple of youth leaders when I called in, but maybe that didn't make it through translation. That's okay.
You're more
they
than
can
welcome
still
to have a
stand.
couple of people here, but only one speaker, if that's possible, please.
Yeah, and then they'll have an opportunity as well, right? Just to stand. Okay. So thank you and
I'm
good
sorry, what
afternoon.
do you mean they'll have an opportunity as well?
To speak.
There's, you have 5 minutes per organization.
Right.
So,
And so these are youth leaders that are not necessarily part of the organization, but I did put into the voicemail when I left. But what I'm asking is, do they have the option to stand and speak just like any other public member?
if they've listed their names technically prior to the meeting started, we just understood that it was you that was doing it, but if there's two only, I will take them. If
Okay.
they give their names
Great.
to Deirdre here, and they will have the ability.
All right, perfect.
And again, limited to 5 minutes, so thank you.
Okay. So I'm speaking from many different lenses today. I identify as an African Indigenous Latina that has grown up in Toronto but immigrated from Nicaragua. And so my lens is one where I have seen the interactions between myself, my family is an immigrant family, my brother, my cousins, growing up in Malvern, my friends. And then now, as a mother of 2 teenage boys, a junior intermediate teacher, and a community educator in Toronto for 15 years. Like you explained, I'm leadership at the Canadian Alliance of Black Educators, and I'm speaking today and forthcoming with all of these identity intersections so that you can understand that I'm looking at the role of police as it pertains to youth engagement from different lenses. So as a parent, educator, youth leader, and overall community member. Although there are different areas that I'd like to address, today I'd like to be specific about anti-Black racism and the need for system-wide, culturally relevant, culturally responsive, community-led training for police officers. From a specific lens, I'm interested in the role that school resource, so police officers are playing in our Toronto schools. We've been, and when I say we, it is a core team of 21 with an external network of over 100 educators, OCT certified, and community educators that have been meeting for a year to really discuss ways in which police can increase their positive engagement with youth without necessarily being the leadership for this relationship within our schools. It is my belief as a parent of teenage boys and as definitely a surrogate mother to amazing youth that I engage with on a regular basis that this setup right here of SROs in schools is not the way in which healthy relationships will be developed between police and youth. I'd like to see more community involvement through a review of the SRO project within schools. We are holding various community forums. There will be one on June 25th at the Driftwood Community Center, 2 to 6 p.m. We have a panel of parents, educators, youth, also representatives that have engaged with the SRO project and the new research coming out of Gita Madan, where it is calling into question the role of SROs in schools and proposing different strategies. We would like to be heard in terms of the parent views of what conflict mediation, de-escalation strategies we would like to see implemented within our schools so that teachers that have gone through quite a bit of development themselves can be the leaders with the youth in this process. Of course, community organizations should play an increased role. It is easier for police officers to get into schools than it is for community leaders. So I myself may need to sneak in the back door, as another community leader had said at the town hall around human trafficking over at Keelan Shepherd the other day, just to talk about student rights and community rights. As a human rights advocate in Toronto for 15 years, I think that my credentials are long and definitely valid. So the fact that it's so hard to be able to speak to youth around these issues is concerning, and a review must be made as to the SROs in schools. Thank you. Okay, so with my 1 minute, I'm going to pose some questions. Pardon me?
You have a chance to tell us some stuff.
That's right. I'm
We
just
get a
going to
chance
pose some questions
okay,
for the
sure.
general audience. I'd like to know if there is any research that speaks to the efficiency, so that proves that SROs in schools is actually increasing positive relationships. It would be my guess that if community could lead this and SROs could be working outside of schools with community, looking towards a community-led, parent-led, youth-led strategy that focuses on reducing, preventing, eliminating anti-Black racism, we will see that relationships can enhance. But to date, I am really questioning, and I would like to be provided with any information that shows that the SRO in schools program is actually leading to an increase in positive relationships. Thank you.
Thank you. Just stay there, because I think committee members
Yeah,
may have a few
absolutely.
questions of you. Councillor Carroll?
So you're advocating today that this become a part of transforming the police force, that if we, but what you're looking at is if we were to review and decide to remove that role, we'd have to do so in partnership with the police board or the school board and such. But if we remove that role, that it's not just an efficiency, we should find a better way. We should actually
Yes.
there should be some other role in the same community.
Yes.
But to a better end.
Yes, community-led, hearing from the parents, hearing from the youth, hearing from the teachers, hearing from the community educators.
Excellent. Okay, thank you.
Victoria?
My question was kind of along the same lines, but because I think on the basis of both looking at the most effective, deployment of police officers to, have proper community relations and maintain trust and so forth and so on, and from a standpoint of efficient use of police resources, this would fit perfectly within the kind of thing we would be looking at as part of the transformation. But Mike, you made it sound as if there'd been, kind of a long-standing request for such review. And has there been like a request made of the police board? I'm not aware of the
Yeah,
city to do that, or is this today the sort of opening request?
Yeah, I would love to have a longer conversation where I can answer that in longer than 20 seconds, but there are other organizations that have been doing a lot of work around the review of SROs. Now, how many of those organizations make it to you, right? Make it to this board. And so I would really encourage for whichever representatives from the City of Toronto are informing you or are your advice people, go-to people, to ask them to increase their scope so that more community voices can be heard, more community organizations can be a part of the conversation, because to answer that question, yes, organizations have been calling for a review of SROs in schools. We have various organizations that will be at the event that will speak to the work they've done. So we will be creating a purposeful advocacy plan that will be presented at York University's conference on August 25th that will seek to involve other community educators and teachers from different boards around Ontario, so not just Toronto boards, but really just looking to wrap services around youth so that they can walk free in their schools and feel in any school that they go to that they are safe and that they are understood, that everything there is meant for their education as opposed to some form of criminalization, some form of lack of representation from people that truly understand all of the factors that youth engagement has to deal with. So do I think that that's a police officer? I think that police officers serve a purpose And that's not to be the teacher in the school, that's not to be the counselor in the school, that's not to be the person that is engaging with our racialized youth on a regular basis around conflict mediation when they haven't necessarily received that system-wide mandatory training, various times throughout the year to look at culturally responsive and reflective ways of engaging.
Just one more very short question, because I think these are entirely appropriate questions to be asked that are consistent with what we're doing here on the
Right.
transformation. Have you sort of invited in a formal way, and I don't mean to participate as much as to listen, I'll call it the institutions of, say, the police board, the police service, the school board, so that they can, at this session, which may well be the first place it's been discussed in this kind of open way, have you invited them to be there to take part, to listen? and
Yeah, this review of SROs in schools has been presented to the director of Toronto Public and Toronto Catholic. The new director now is soon to be presented with this, what we call a 3-year action plan, looking at a review of the SROs, perhaps then a percentage, being removed to eventually having SROs out of schools and community empowered, with parents empowered, with teachers empowered to lead conflict de-escalation and mediation within the schools themselves.
Councillor Lee?
Thank you very much for coming in and presenting. I'm trying to recall that SROs were implemented under the report written by Alvin Curling and Ryan McMurtry, that to put officers into the schools to try to help prevent kids from going to the wrong side. Is that your understanding of what the role of the SRO was at that time?
I think that the role that appears on paper and the role that's actually implemented can often be very different. Okay. I mean, there's a lot of distance between what one could ideally hope happened and what actually has happened. I can't speak to, smaller conversations that took place in developing this project. What I can speak to is to the youth experiences and the parent experiences. Okay. What I can speak to is the fact that school trustees I've spoken to are confused about SROs in schools. Teachers are confused. Parents are confused. Youth have told me, when we are doing these community forums, they've said, well, a question that they'd like to ask a police officer, an SRO, is, why are you always watching me? So really, I don't know if increasing positive relationships was the goal, or was it to be a constant presence so that perhaps you could eliminate violence. But vigilance, high vigilance, and criminalization are not strategies that I endorse or that we endorse. So I think that looking at something that really looks at African-centered pedagogies, that look to our NIA circles, where we can actually discuss conflicts with our elders, with our parents, with our community educators, as opposed to sitting a youth down with a police officer to have a conversation with someone they don't engage with on a regular basis.
Okay.
Thank you. Councillor, Mr. Jeffers, you had a question as well?
Yeah, just a quick question. Maybe it's general for anyone to respond. In hearing on what's happened so far with the Transformational Task Force, and with your experience with young people, diverse youth, and many young people, how do they view the rest of the criminal justice system and the role that it has to play with all of this? Because I know sometimes some young people think it's a conspirational thing, people conspiring against them, right? And so how do you see this task force maybe addressing those issues? Because it obviously can be done in isolation from my point of view anyway. You get a sense like the probation office and officers and how all that relates and so forth. You want to make a comment?
Yeah, I don't pretend to be able to speak for all youth everywhere or community leaders everywhere, but what I do know is the work that I've done in priority neighborhoods, east, west, north, south in Toronto. And what I see is on a continuous basis that youth are saying, I feel constantly watched. My information is asked of me in my school hallways. I don't know what happens with this information. I'm feeling that, I'm coming to school and I have to worry, are my pants too low? I'm being told things that my parents should tell me, right? So I think that it's really problematic when this is the experience they're having within their hallways at school, and then this is the experience they're having within, their streets, if they're, hanging out in front of their homes on the street or their apartment buildings on the street. I'm not going to pretend that we don't, that we didn't just live through the magnificent activist efforts of Black Lives Matter, and I'm not going to pretend that they didn't just call out so many problems that are happening between police and youth. What I am going to say is that there are multiple voices coming at you guys saying something is wrong. Yes, be proud of your traditions if they are working. But if certain traditional practices are not working, let's allow youth that are living in this, 2016 year, let's allow parents that are raising these youth, educators, both inside and outside of the classroom, that are engaging with them on a daily basis. Let's get school trustees in the room, let's get policymakers in the room, let's get a multiple stakeholder steering committee of some sort, and let's review SROs in schools. Because from my perspective, yes, it is representative of a larger issue, and it is systemic, and we know this, right?
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
The next deposition from Jessica Roston. And again, Jessica, you've got 5 minutes, and I'll give you a 1-minute warning.
Sure, thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm here today as a 25-year-old young person. I'm a community educator, youth worker, and graduate student researching youth, and particularly immigrant youth experiences in education. As a young Latin American woman who immigrated to Toronto as a child, as a student of TDSB, as someone who has worked since she was 15 within the community, at the malls, at the local coffee shops, as a child sitter in people's homes, my mom's hair salon, restaurants, at school, and for 3 years now in Toronto communities as a youth worker. As this person, I feel I can say I know what it's like to grow up and be a young person in this city. Currently, I'm also learning what it's like to be an adult in this city. And what I can tell you is this. I can tell you that the youth we meet today will be the ones to face pivotal moments in the coming decades of history in Toronto and around the world. I can tell you that the stakes for community building and safety are high for everyone, but they are much higher for some more than others. Youth are often dismissed as not ready for the world, pathologized, criminalized, and as a result have opportunities for respect, success, and well-being taken from them. In my experience, police interactions with youth rarely go beyond traditional pathologizing and criminalizing approaches. At the age of 13, my brother was taken in handcuffs from my house for a minor infraction. 13. I work with youth who face long-term post-traumatic stress because of police brutality, carding, or heavy and undeserved criminal charges. They are stuck in cycles of cynicism, fear, and deteriorating mental health. The truth is, in many communities in Toronto, youth and young adults cannot sit in public spaces without constantly looking over their shoulders. We don't feel safe because of police presence. Consider this when you're talking about extending your reach. This is the current police-community relationship and culture that you are trying to transform. This dehumanizing reality of risk is even more dangerous for racialized, newcomer, and immigrant youth, or youth that come from marginalized communities. Specifically, brown and black bodies are over-policed, over-surveillanced, and over-criminalized. These interactions are generally quick to escalate into disrespect, accusations, and physical threats from police officers. These interactions are violent and dehumanizing. The presence of cops in schools signals to students that they are under surveillance, that we don't trust them, and that we think of them as potential or future criminals. Officers in schools do not make our learning spaces safer. They introduce children to additional legal penalties that can carry repercussions across their life. The school cannot be the space to develop trust. This must happen at a baser level with the stopping of practices like carding, police profiling, and police brutality. As adults, elders, educators, community organizers, and leaders, we have a key role to play as allies in the building of the Toronto of tomorrow, of the Toronto that youth are already in the process of inheriting and co-creating. We must acknowledge the profound truth that our traditions need to evolve, and that youth will be the ones to take the limits of our knowledge and organization further than we can currently imagine. To be successful in this, we must, number one, immediately remove police presence from inside and around schools. Show respect for our community youth spaces, and understand that your presence is currently harmful to their well-being. Number two, have an explicit commitment for discussions that lead to an understanding of how race intersects with other forms of social oppression, such as class, gender, religion, sexual orientation, disability, mental health, and immigration status. Number three, partnerships does not need to mean police presence. Accept that policing is not always the best option for handling community and neighborhood conflict. Acknowledge the training and effectiveness of youth workers, elders, educational leaders, and community organizations in handling community conflict and crisis. In my experience working with youth and community organizations, I can confidently say there are dedicated, compassionate, well-prepared, and knowledgeable people already effectively tackling these issues in our communities and schools every day. They're looking to alternatives for creating safe spaces, such as transformative and restorative justice practices, peace-building methods, providing mental health and counseling services, access to resources, and conflict transformation training programs. These strategies are truly transformational. Collaboration means placing them as first responders, deriving police training directly from their community-focused frameworks, and supporting the funding of these initiatives at multiple levels of government so they can do what they do best and meet the complex demands of the city's communities. Number 4, make a commitment to being...
30 seconds.
30 seconds. Make a commitment to being critical of ourselves, our impact, and our social structures. Make a commitment to social justice and anti-oppressive, anti-racist relationships. Recognize that it will take time to build trust and that increasing police presence is counterproductive if there are not structures in place to build that trust and accountability. This means putting community voices and strategies at the center of these structural changes, valuing youth's well-being and participation in communities, and hearing us when we say that police officers absolutely do not belong in our schools.
Thank you very much. Questions, colleagues? Shelley?
Oh, there we are. I was interested when you were talking about partnerships better not always mean, or shouldn't always mean, police presence, that I think you said conflicts and something else can sometimes be better mediated by someone else based in the community. And you mentioned that you're a youth outreach worker. Is that, youth outreach workers, particularly, well, we know the ones that we have in the city's programs, are they already doing this work anyway? And there are cases where they might have been able to complete that type of work, but the police arrived on the scene and then it wasn't resolved as smoothly as it might have been?
Yeah, so at Runnymede Collegiate, at Runnymede and St. Clair,
I know it. Yeah.
Jane and St. Clair, they were having issues with youth behavior, and the solutions were to call in a police officer to talk about consequences. Obviously, this did not have a very profound effect, and youth workers were called instead from Access Alliance Community Center. What they did was lead a workshop with the youth, ask them what the issues were, and then relay that information to teachers, to parents, and to the community. They found a solution rather than enforcing law. There are many organizations that are already doing this. The Children's Peace Theater is an amazing organization. And there are youth workers across Toronto that are trained in this conflict transformation. So what I'm saying when I say partnerships don't mean police presence is police can learn a lot from these organizations. You don't need to be in our schools to have a partnership. You can learn from these organizations and take those frameworks into the community space, not into the school.
Right. So when we, in the context of the task force document, when we say partnerships, all you're saying is it means knowing who groups like those are and knowing where they are, instead of saying, we're going to a place, let's find a group to come with us, let them go first.
Yeah, so partnerships would mean really extending those networks and understanding where we are.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Other questions, colleagues? Jessica, thank you very much then.
Thank you.
The final deposition of Paige Lewis. And again, 5 minutes and 1 minute warning.
Can I do this? Am I allowed to do this?
Sure.
Okay, because I'm not comfortable sitting down. It's like a bit constricting for me. I don't know. Okay. So, Argentina. All of you who are sitting here in the audience for that in solidarity for our community. I am a bit nervous, sorry. So I was asked to come in here and voice my views on the decriminalization of the teenage academic environment. As you all know, in light of the passing of Toronto youth, Jordan Manners, in 2008, Chief Bill Blair had proposed the role of the school resource officer. This initiative was proposed to reduce the violence that our youth were expressing in our schools as a means to resolve these disputes and conflicts. a battle of the minds, if you will, pretty much. To get us in a state of the collective consciousness, I'd like to kind of start by asking you guys a few questions. And if you could politely respond with raising your hand, okay? So who here was born in Toronto?
Sorry, I'm going to ask you to limit to just your deputation.
Sorry?
Sorry, no, just,
It's a way
just
to
present.
engage the audience to know that you guys are listening and are paying attention to the messages that we have to offer as youth in this community.
Why not?
As
Just answer.
Okay?
We're
So
listening,
again,
thank you.
Again, how many of you were schooled in Toronto? How many of you grew up in Toronto? Okay, so it's nice to see that we have so many locals here. So the reason I asked those questions was to ensure that I have at least one person here that understands the depth of what we're trying to say. Right now, I'm hoping that you guys take the opportunities when you guys have them to exercise your authority in being a leader and inspire your team members to be the police officers, the counselors, the teachers, the adults in the room, whatever position that you hold, to inspire your community to be better and to lead in the roles that you wanted to play. I myself have a long history, and it's a long-weighted history in Toronto, being both born, raised, and educated here. And I've developed quite a delicate relationship with the task force. And without any formal post-secondary experiences or training like my counterpart, I can only speak from personal experiences and interactions with various TPS members and representatives of the team. As my community associate has already explained, the academic learning environment is being severely disrupted by the oppressive and confining responses from our various SROs representatives. These destructive behaviors are leaving negative imprints in the minds of our youth, and it's effectively ruining the nationalism of our institutions. Well, the nationalism that our institutions do aim to instill. To be proud of our nation is the reason why you guys serve. To be part of your nation is the reason why we protect. How many of you are actively protecting the minds of the next generation of our Canadians? If our youth do not feel a part of our nation, or do not trust our task force because they fail to embody the mandate of protect and serve, how do you expect them to stand on the foundation that our laws have laid out for us, building up the characteristics within us as the Canadian identity? I'm hoping that our advocacy for the maintenance of our mental health and well-being of the Canadian youth is supported, and the challenge of addressing peer-to-peer conflict is reviewed, including the voices of our community, and in the conversation and the implementation of alternative methods of conflict management.
Thank you very much, Paige.
All right.
Any questions? Committee members? Okay. If not, thank you very much. That's
No
great.
questions?
Yep, no questions. Thank you. Okay. The board members, questions of Michelle, or Greg, and the task force in the presentation? Shelley.
Yes, I did have a question. The biggest angst that we saw in the launch yesterday was there are a lot of changes, and in them we say that the changes are all possible because we're looking at a whole new way of policing, a whole new way of choosing where the response is, a whole new method of deployment. But in the slide, when we get to the end of the presentation, we then look at a slide that says year 1 efficiencies, and then by year 3, we're doing this new thing. And that was picked up yesterday. People are concerned that the safety comes after we do the cuts, because, you know, that's what people see efficiencies as. Can you speak to that a little bit? I've been saying to people, because I wouldn't let it happen as a board member, so I hope I'm not being a bit previous to the task force. I, for instance, as a board member, wouldn't vote for you to lock the door of a division until you've already made sure that the change in the culture, the change in the response, the community base we're looking for is already happening. So how does that square with your year 1, 2, 3?
So a couple of things. First off, I want to just preface this by saying that there's a respect, obviously, for the consultation process. So we have to be mindful that we'll want to receive that input and that feedback before we finalize. But having said that, there are many things we can start doing. And the second thing is also respect for the board decision around the adoption of the recommendation. So with that as a given, we will engage in that consultation over the next several months. But the team has already started to look at implementation. But for example, if we are going to, through attrition, not fill those positions, that's an immediate efficiency. And so we've just recognized that. And also that's signaling the importance of getting ready for the next fiscal cycle for the city. And so making sure that that lines up in year one. But having said that, the work has already begun on, that sort of pre-planning, and some previous work had been done around the division consolidation. That needs to continue to happen. In my conversations with those responsible, they will look at that as a prototype and build that out. To your point, you don't want to move forward on multiple prototypes until you get it right the first time. So we'll move on several, like the report is really, that system approach is always making sure that you have your eye today on what you need to get done. And there are some practical realities about budget cycles and hiring cycles and promotion cycles that have to be taken into account while we are continuing to build in the foundations to actually make modernization and transformation happen. The service, and Greg, you may want to speak to this, has already engaged a number of consultants, whether it's on IT, it's on looking at the models and the service calls and where that can be reconfigured. Lots of work is beginning to happen already. But I think you can appreciate if the board truly wants modernization and transformation, it does not happen on day 2.
And you went right to my only other question is around the issue of tech, because a lot of this hinges on technology. And I share Mr. Langenfeld's concern. So speaking to a deputy that's concerned about the big data piece, we're looking at big data, which always makes us nervous with all due respect in policing, because we're like, are we gathering more data and locking it away and now we can't get it? Or are we looking at what we heard about just last month, the push from the community, see us finding better ways to scrub so we can engage in more open data exercises, so that some of those things that the community themselves can engage in and build their own tech solutions around happen through open data more than big data. Is that sort of the way you're looking? And are we sure that we're not just saying we got this wonderful new strategy, so we're just going to engage the tech cartel, and for an $11 billion contract, they'll solve all our problems. We want to look at open data and things like that, and cloud computing solutions such that we can say we need a solution and we need it a year from now, not 5 years and $120 million later.
Let me make 2 maybe opening comments, and then I'll ask Greg to speak quite specifically to it. You talked about this requiring a lot of technology underpinning. I actually think the most important underpinning of what we've written is around the behavioral relationship changes. And so technology is fantastic, but it has to be underpinned with a very solid human resource workforce that is engaged in different ways. And I just want to make that point. The second thing I want to echo the deposition, and that is that concepts of big data, use of technology, that kind of reach that can occur both from a communication standpoint and intelligence standpoint, always has to again be guided by the principles that are set out in the report. Active accountability, transparency, trust, that would enshrine that work going forward, right? And I think that's an important point to make, because I think your question is is not only relevant, it's highly advisory as we do our next period of work. And I did take away from the gentleman's comments the important frameworks that need to be put in place so that the public has great confidence what we are doing as a service, and then how that is being done. And Greg, I'll maybe let you speak more specifically about what's being contemplated.
So if you take a look at the City of Toronto has done some amazing work with regards to open data, specifically with the Wellbeing Toronto initiative. And when we took a look at that, we really looked at how we can take police data, map it over social service data, because that can really tell us how we can and who we can partner with. And we have successful models such as Focus Rexdale, such as our CYAC model, that really looks at true partnerships, because it's correct that sometimes the police are not the proper agency to get involved in certain situations, but we have information that that can assist these other agencies as well. Absolutely.
I have just one question for each of Michelle and Greg, if I could, Mr. Chair. For Michelle, I think it's the same slide that caught my eye, that maybe caught Councillor Carroll's, and that you were referring to. And I think, if I remember what it said year 3 transformation begins. And I was just going to say, further to your comment of a moment ago, there's quite a difference between day 2 and year 3, like about 1,000 days difference. And so I just wanted to, I would have thought that things like triaging calls to sort of have police go where they're most needed, even if there are buildings that continue not to have the doors locked, that there could be fewer people that are working inside there and more out into the community and so forth and so on. And I just wanted to get your take on, how quickly, doing it properly, that we actually could begin the transformation. Because my fear, of course, is that the higher the chances this report joins the other 50, if we wait longer to actually begin, for real, the transformation.
It's a fair comment, and lots of different language has been kicked around, whether it's modernization, restructuring, transformation. There is a bit of a trajectory here, and I think that it's absolutely anticipated that there will be a change that will be seen, I would believe, quite quickly after the task force is finally, and I think even during this process, if we go through the consultation process and there is great alignment on these recommendations or some of the recommendations initially, then we can move more quickly. But some of the very deep transformation where you're really talking about taking what is in essence a 50-year-old model and redesigning its physical footprint, for instance, that doesn't happen even in just 6 months or 8 months. That will take some time. And so, maybe the language on the last slide is the use of the word begins is maybe not accurate in that sense, because I think you'll see many things changing during the course of even the life of the task force. And but as we move into that second year, I think it would be the board should expect to see some real signs that transformation is taking hold. And I guess the last comment I would make to that is the task force has envisioned a scorecard of some kind of progress report, and I think we'll have a better indication of what that looks like in each of those years. Having done this a fair bit in my own career, I would just say that we want to make sure that we do embed it, and there is a difference between change and true transformation. And what you're seeing is really, in that slide, a trajectory of really becoming unstuck from where we are, beginning to change, and then ultimately that real transformative engine and that continuous improvement occurring.
Mr. Chair, my question for Greg was this. Quite a bit of the initial discussion 24 hours after the report had to do with the ability to maintain as good or higher a level of community safety with the changed arrangements and way of policing. I just wondered, from the police side, and I don't want to try and divide the committee. I mean, the great thing was there was a consensus here between civilians and police, which I think is something different. From the police side, could you give me any sense of perspective that you and your colleagues had on that side of the task force, or that part of the task force, with respect to how the different way of policing, perhaps with a smaller number of total officers, could actually, I'm sure you wouldn't have signed on if you hadn't believed it could actually enhance or certainly maintain the current levels of community safety.
Yes, absolutely. And just to build on what Michelle talked about transformation really kind of taking hold, in that process, we're also going to be maintaining constable strength on the front line by looking at our administrative roles that officers are currently doing, even in certain investigative roles, and redeploying those officers to the front line to maintain a level of community safety and enhancing it. Moving forward, we also we realize that we need to become a little bit more efficient in our functions. Like I said, current primary response model, we're asking officers to do everything. By making those roles a little bit more efficient, by embedding officers in neighborhoods, by being part of the fabric of the community, we feel that we can go from more of a reactive service to one that really puts crime prevention at the heart of our operations.
Me again, just reiterate, Michelle and Greg, what a great job. We appreciate, Michelle, we thought this was your career, but you've committed so much time to it. We can only tremendously thank you. So, great presentation. Thank you all, both of you, for all the work, and your colleagues for all the work. It's been extraordinary, so thank you. Colleagues, I would say now that we want to, 3 is the presentation we've just gone through. 19 is the report, which in effect we've just received. I would tend to take them both together, just as we've done. Thank Michelle and Greg for the presentation in number 3, and in number 19, just say that recommend that perhaps the board, as I say, really heartily endorse the work of the task force and defer consideration, final consideration, to the July meeting of the Toronto Police Services Board, when we'll be able to hear from broader depositions from the public after they've had time to read and digest this report. So if that's all right with you guys, I guess I need a motion, Mayor Tory, to that effect. Councillor Carroll, yes?
Just before you move the motion, and because we're in a public forum now, so people could organize to speak to it, but they can also, can they submit in writing? Those sorts of
Yes.
things
Yep,
are all
absolutely.
on our website. It will tell you how to do that.
Yep.
As of today. Excellent. Okay.
So will you second the Mayor Tory's proposal? Thank you, Councillor Carroll. No, we can't. So, yeah. And I just reminded, so I think, I've already thanked the task force members in the room, but I think our motion also perhaps wants to capture, should capture, because I think this is an extraordinary amount of work over a short period of time. People worked, several meetings a week, and members of the service did just an extraordinary amount of extra work. So I see many of them here, Siobhan and Jeff and Mark, and standing at the back, and Mike. But listen, I think, Mayor Tory, if we could amend the motion to include that thanks for this extraordinary work, that would be great. No, I'm not. No. Councillor Lee?
I will move that to thank them, and also thank the 2 co-chairs, Mr. Pringle and Chief Saunders, for taking the lead and recommending the right people on this task force.
Okay. Mark?
Yeah, I want to echo the same. The report is nice and pretty, but at the end of the day, there was a tremendous amount of work that was put in. And what I like about it is right from the start, the community lens was there at the forefront. So we received some deputations today, and I thank you for those deputations, because that gives us an opportunity to think and listen to what we're doing and what we need to do, and to make sure that we get it right. So I really do hope that when the consultation pieces come out, and there are going to be a lot of opportunities, it's important that we hear that voice, because at the end of the day, that final report is what we have to live with. So I want to make sure that we hear everybody and what their concerns and issues are if we're going to make this city the good city that it is.
Okay, so I have a motion that's actually moved by Mayor Tory, which includes the thanks, and you will second it, Councillor Lee. All in favor? Any contrary? Okay, thank you very much. I might just, one final thing, there are a number, because I see Adil over here, there are a number of members in the room. Perhaps they could just stand up for a second, the members of the task force, both the service and non-service. members just stand up and get our thanks. Thank you all very much. I think we've got one more item that really is related to that, and that is item number 25, which talks to it's the walk-on report that you have, and it's about the Senior Project Manager for the Transformational Task Force Change Initiative, a contract awarded, and I would ask that we approve that. Councillor Lee? Seconded. Dr. Noria? All in favor? Any contrary? Thank you very much. So that takes you 3, 19, and 25. Brings us back on the agenda item to the presentation of the Annual Report 2016 Audit Work Plan. Acting Deputy Chief Peter Ewan. And Dana, Dana Styra, the Manager, Audit, Quality, and Assurance. Dana, you're here? Great. Thank you. Over to you guys.
Manager Dana Styra is going to give you an overview, some information about the unit she runs, the audit that reports to the Deputy Chief of Operational Supports, and it reports to Corporate Risk Management.
Internal Audit Unit, and in 2011 became the first union service in the world to receive accreditation from the Institute of Internal Auditors, an international organization with 180,000 members from 190 countries, that set the global standards for the internal auditing profession. To receive this accreditation, audit and quality assurance had to undergo an external independent assessment by the Institute of Internal Auditors, which included a review of the unit's internal audit activities and supporting documents, on-site interviews, and validation of compliance with all required standards. They keep current by examining auditing trends, studies, and reports, and have implemented a continuous improvement program to ensure they provide a high-quality audit service that meets the needs of management and stakeholders. Civilian and uniform members are highly educated, qualified, knowledgeable, and committed to what they do. They hold a variety of professional designations and have diverse divisional and specialized unit experience. Each member receives continuous professional development, including a minimum of 40 hours of audit training annually. Audit and quality assurance has full access to all TPS activities, personnel, programs, and records. The unit assists the Toronto Police Services Board and the Chief of Police in fulfilling the Police Services Act requirement to implement the quality assurance process relating to the delivery of adequate and effective police services. They identify risks, errors, and instances of non-compliance, and work with members to find achievable solutions that will enhance operational effectiveness and improve upon the services provided to the public. Audit and quality assurance is a valuable resource and keeper of corporate knowledge. Their recommendation database goes back to 1993 and contains over 3,000 entries from various reports. Requests for information are addressed by the unit, and advisory services are provided to numerous entities and other police organizations. Audit and quality TPS activities are conducted in an effective, efficient, economical, equitable, and environmentally responsible manner in response to community needs. This is audit and quality assurance.
Annual audit work plan. I believe there's a PowerPoint presentation. If you could bring that up, please. So before I begin, I would like to briefly review the mission of the Audit and Quality Assurance Unit. The main objectives of the unit are to provide independent and objective assurance and consulting activities, ensure that processes are consistent with and address service priorities, and to evaluate the potential for the occurrence of fraud within the organization. These are key functions that promote good governance and risk management. There are also specific activities that the unit undertakes on a regular basis, and the development of the audit work plan is one of them. Work plan development is an important and critical activity, and I would like to present an overview of the process. The process begins with research. Research is a continuous activity that takes place throughout the year and involves examining various professional publications, such as those from the Institute of Internal Auditors, board reports and other internal reports, and audit reports of other agencies, including the federal and provincial government, the Auditor General's Office, and audit reports from our other police services. Through examination of these materials, we are kept apprised of global and local issues and emerging risks and opportunities. The unit consults with the entire senior management team to gain their perspective on risk issues. We also consult with members from units in which we have identified a particular audit concern. In addition, Toronto Police participates as an active member of the City of Toronto's Internal Audit Working Group, where experiences from the internal audit departments of the Toronto Transit Commission, the Toronto Community Housing Corporation, the Toronto Parking Authority, and the City of Toronto are shared and discussed so we keep up to date about citywide issues and can exchange ideas and discuss best practices. Based on the results of the research and consultation process, the unit creates a database of all potential audit projects. Legislation and service priorities, goals, and objectives are key drivers in the work plan development process. Provincial adequacy standards contain the requirement to audit or review certain functions on a yearly basis, and service procedures direct audit and quality assurance to conduct mandatory audits of specific areas. The unit also takes into account alignment between audit projects and service priorities, as well as coverage across all command areas. At this point, the audit team critically analyzes the risks and areas that have been identified through the previous processes. We examine and add to the database additional audit topics and pay particular attention to the frequency or intensity by which certain issues or areas have been brought up. The next step is the risk assessment process. This part of the process is the most complex. We've taken concepts included in internationally recognized frameworks and applied them to a policing environment. Risk is defined as any negative consequence that may hinder the organization in achieving its priorities, goals, or objectives. The unit employs a risk ranking methodology that consists of various elements, depending on whether operational or financial elements or both are being considered. This concept is further refined by considering the likelihood, severity, and impact of negative events that may occur. Both inherent risk and residual risk concepts are incorporated into the methodology. This last step is where science and art intersects. The risk assessment process produces a ranking of audit areas by degree of risk, which is augmented by mandatory audits. However, workload balance needs to be taken into consideration. I need to consider availability of staff, skill sets, and length of time that the audit might take. The work plan is presented to command each time the Executive Assurance Committee meets, which is 4 times a year. It is adjusted as emerging or new issues are identified. So although the process is a complex one, we trust that we have developed a work plan that is timely and commensurate with the risks of the organization. I thank you for your attention, and I would be most welcome to answer any questions that you have about the work plan.
Thank you, Dan. Any questions, colleagues? Go ahead.
I did have a question on the actual work plan. The presentation is very helpful because you talk about, you also measure things against the Police Service Act itself. So you're not just looking at, the efficiency of the structure of how we do things, but you would measure whether or not we're in compliance with legislation as well.
Well, compliance would be one of the areas, but we would
Right.
be looking at things like governance structure, various other components of legislation that we may need to be compliant with as well. So it's an all-encompassing process.
So I'm looking at audit of human resources background checks, which is something we've talked about at a couple of committees. So something like that, in terms of doing background checks, you would look at exactly what the Police Service Act requires us to find out about someone before we hire them.
Well, we would take into account Police Service Act issues, but we would also look at a larger global thing as what are we doing, why are we doing it, what is the requirement for it, is there a requirement, is there a better, more efficient way to do it, look at the process itself, so take a look at what resources or IT issues might be involved in it.
Right. There's also, I was kind of surprised to see elder and vulnerable adult abuse. What would you be looking at there from an audit perspective? Because that, if you're looking at something like that, that is a response police make, are you getting into telling them how to police?
Well, we do audit the provincial adequacy standards, so that is operational in nature. It is a requirement that, of course, the board have a policy and that the chief have one, and then there are specific procedures, rules and regulations that officers must handle and meet when they go out to deal with these. There's information that needs to be gathered and the process is there, and we would be looking at everything. So we would be looking at occurrences. Let's start at the very beginning. How many elder abuse situations do we have? Take a sample of those and see how well our officers have done in meeting the requirements of dealing with elder abuse occurrences.
Okay, thank you. Those were my questions.
Other questions, colleagues? If not, may I have a motion to receive? Councillor Lee, seconded. Councillor Carroll, all in favor? Any contrary? Carried unanimously.
Thank you very much.
Peter, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Takes us back to item number 5. I'm sorry. We have a deputation on 8, which is the Integrated Record Information System. Mr. Langenfeld. This should be an interesting one. Five minutes.
Thank you. Since it shouldn't actually be much for me to say, right? Relating to that fact that it is, in fact, the closeout report, and presumably there won't be any follow-up reports on this. I note that, in fact, on page 7 of that of the submission here, the second sentence in the first paragraph there reads, however, based on the final implementation in Wave 4 to implement change processing, it is simply too early to properly assess efficiency gains as it relates to disclosure. As of the time of this report, many of the processes are still settling, and change processing, while implemented, is a new service-wide change. And my point is really that I don't think you're ready for the final closeout report on this. I think based on that statement that, in fact, you do need an additional follow-up on this to identify. That is sort of the whole point of this closeout report, is to identify the successful achieving of the goals of the project and to measure that against the objectives. And clearly in this one situation, and presumably in some other areas, not with the report producers not being comfortable to say that they're at the point where they have the history to make those determinations, it seems that you need one more follow-up on this report anyways. So I would suggest that that's appropriate. I also noticed going through this, and I didn't find the section here this afternoon, but it does in fact mention scanning of officers' notes. And of course that came up, I think it was last month's submission with the one of the complaints that the board was reviewing. And that was a question of where some notes were, again, destroyed due to some water leak issue in one of the storage locations in one of the divisional headquarters. And so I guess my question is, what stage is that at? Are notes being scanned at this point. Is that happening? Is that simply something in the future plan? It didn't come up when that question was raised last month in that other issue, so I simply, I haven't seen anywhere where there's the status of what's happening with that is indicated, and so I think it's appropriate just for the board to be informed and the public. Other than that, I think we've talked about all the issues with the IRIS system in terms of it has potential benefits. It certainly has a significant cost at almost $25 million, but hopefully it has the robustness to be able to deal with now all the technological issues that the Transformational Task Force here is going to be looking at trying to get out of this. So hopefully that's been taken care of. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Any questions, members? Any comments on the report? Shelley? I'm sorry, yeah. Sorry, Shelley, do you have a question, staff? Yep. Chris, thank you.
Well, just maybe Mr. Veneziano wants to explain. I think maybe we want to clarify for the deputy, and it's not that we're never going to talk about IRIS again. Closeout is a financial term, is it not? You're talking about closing out the capital account, but not that we won't report and review?
First of all, I want to clarify. Yes, it's a $21 million project. The budget was 25, so we came in about $3.5 million below budget. But I think, yes, to your point, Councillor, this is a system that went live in November of 2013. It's a huge system that touches almost every member of the service. There's been transitional issues that we've been dealing with, and issues will continue to come up, and we're going to correct them as they go along. So at some point, we have to close it off. When our funding ended at the end of 2015, that was the point that we then provide notice to the city that the project has been completed, recognizing that there's issues, as you pointed out, that still need to be addressed, and we'll continue to address those issues moving forward. We've got a business change management unit that was set up specifically for that purpose and to ensure that we get the greatest investment and return on that investment.
But you'll be reporting on it.
This is the report on the closeout.
So if I may ask a follow-up question,
may.
then I do have a question, and I do have some sympathy for the deputant, because when I read the report, I took closeout to mean the financial transaction of closing out the capital implementation cost centers where the money was held for the project. But it does raise that there are parts of it that haven't, Chris read the line, that to evaluate whether or not we really got bang for our buck, it's too soon to tell. Some of the third or fourth phases is basically what we're getting at here. So I would take that to mean that while we're closing out the cost centers we used to pay to put this thing in place, that we will hear back a happy report, good news. It changed everything in the whole world. It walks, talks, eats, and spits nickels. So that we're going to get that report somewhere down the line.
Well, that's at the board's discretion.
We'd have to request it.
This report actually does talk that we have achieved the majority of the benefits and also recognizes lessons learned that we will now take to other projects, transformation being probably a good one to talk about.
Right.
But we're satisfied with the achievements that we've had to date. We know that there's issues that have to be addressed, but it's really up to the board to decide whether they want a further report on this.
Okay. So we'll maybe put that on our own list.
Well, Councillor Lee.
Yeah, on page 11, on the other significant issues encountered and lessons learned, the last point was that related training has not been fully developed and incorporated in courses offered. Is there a plan to do that?
We'll get you somebody that actually can answer the question.
Now, the last bullet point on page 11, on the Visit Act related training has not been fully developed and incorporated in courses. Shouldn't that be a part of the mandate to train the people to use the tool correctly?
Yes, absolutely, sir. The college has now instructors that have developed the courses. It's not fully developed yet. As you can appreciate, the project had a core team of people, and as they've left and moved on, some to retirement, there was a challenge to bring these college instructors up to a level where they can do that training. And the Business Change Management Unit of the Office of the Chief is working very closely with the college to bring that level up. And as a matter of fact, are working on things like videos and tips and tricks that the officers can actually access in the car. So it's not fully developed, but it's a lessons learned. It's something we need to.
Is there a timeline that you expect most of this to be done?
Again, this was written some time ago, so
Okay.
we're pretty much there with the college, and we meet them with them on a regular basis.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other questions, colleagues? If not, may I have a motion to receive? Councillor Lee, seconded, Councillor Carroll. All in favor? Any contrary? Carried unanimously. Thank you. We have another deposition on item number 10, the 2015 annual report training programs. Derek Moran. Derek, are you here? Oh, yep. Derek, you know the rules. 5 minutes, 1 minute warning.
First of all, I just want to acknowledge and accept the oath, subscribed oath of office that you all took pursuant to Section 4 of the Public Officers Act to be a trustee of mine. Recommendation number 12 talks about the service continue to ensure all uniform officers and investigators receive training that includes, but is not limited to, Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, the Constitution. I think Mayor Tory at this point knows, as well as his treasurer, Mike St. Amant, that I'm rather keen on Section 7 of the Constitution. And I've often wondered whether police officers are taught what exactly the security of the person actually means mentioned in Section 7. So Constitution Act starts off by saying everyone has the right to life, liberty, and security of the person and the right not to be deprived thereof and except in accordance with the principles of fundamental justice. Basically says the same thing in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in Article 3. Says the same thing basically in Part 3, Article 9 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. So everyone knows, and they say, and a guy online said so, and that's just the way it is, that the security mentioned in this section actually refers to safety, right? I don't know about that. The Federal Interpretation Act says the definition given for security means sufficient security, and sureties means sufficient sureties. And when those words are used, one person is sufficient, therefore, unless otherwise expressly required. Now, we all grew up, I think, as a general rule, knowing that you don't use the word that's being defined in the actual word that you're defining. But those French people, they got a different word for everything, right? So if you take the French translation at the bottom of that definition and retranslate it on Google Translate, you'll like this being a bonds trader yourself.
Oh, thanks.
Sure, Pringle.
Bring me into it.
If you retranslate caution ou cautionnement, it turns into deposit or bond. Nothing to do with safety. So the Supreme Court said in Alberta Treasury Branches versus MNR, Toronto Dominion Bank versus MNR, 1996, that security is something which is given to ensure the repayment of a loan. British North America Act mentions not once but twice something about the borrowing of money on the public credit. So a further giveaway as to the true nature of the meaning of security can be seen in the black letter law you mentioned 3 times during the farewell for Anna Kinistowski, Mayor Tory, in 2 maxims in the back of a Black's Law dictionary. One is causes of dower, life, liberty, revenue are among the things favored in law, and the treasury, dower, life, and liberty are things favored in law. That's basically Section 7 of our Constitution. They just kind of rejigged the words a little bit there. And since the Constitution also says that we recognize the supremacy of God, allegedly, I wasn't there, I've never met him. Mark 12:41 says, and Jesus sat over the treasury and beheld how the people cast money into the treasury, and many that were rich cast in much. I think what they're trying to say is we're meant to deal with the treasury, not banks, maybe. So, furthermore, the Business Corporations Act says in Section 138.1 of Ontario that a security is a warrant. Business Corporations Act defines a warrant as any certificate or other document issued by a corporation as evidence of conversion privileges or options or rights to acquire securities of the corporation. That's given a birth certificate by the province of Ontario that has a red number usually on the back of it that starts with a letter, and you would probably know, being a bonds trader, that's a...
So 1 minute now.
It's evidence, proof of a security. And that the Corporations Act of Ontario, Section 49, talks of share warrants and basically what to do with it. I just want to point out that the word entitled is used 4 times in that section, so apparently, yeah, we are entitled something from this life. So I just want to point out that Section 7 of the Bills of Exchange Act mentions about the warrant, which is actually the security. Section 7 of the Constitution Act really should say everyone has the right to the warrant of the person. Everyone, no confusion? Everyone knows what a security really means now? Excellent. Any questions?
Thank you. Well, just one correction. I think my partners would refer to me as a has-been bond trader, but
what, Bitcoin trader? What?
A has-been bond trader.
Okay.
But, thank you for recognizing it. Thank you. Any questions, colleagues of Derek? Okay. Thank you very much. With that, item number 10, the annual report on training. Are there any questions members have? If not, a motion to receive. Shelley, motion. Councillor Carroll, seconded. Councillor Lee, all in favor? Any opposed? Carried unanimously. Item number 12, another deposition. This is the City Council recommendation preventing suicide deaths from bridges. Mr. Langenfeld. Five minutes with a 1-minute warning.
Okay. Well, you know the day's getting close to ending when you see me for the third time, right? On this issue, certainly, I think we all agree the city has to work towards preventing suicide deaths. My concern is that the focus inappropriately becomes a question of mode of committing suicide. This question of, well, we're going to concentrate on preventing bridge jumping deaths, and that, you know, we can certainly put fences up around all the bridges, and that'll take care of that, and we can make sure that nobody succeeds in committing suicide that way. The trade-off, I would say, is that you then end up with a situation where those people that are dedicated to the idea of going through with it will simply find a way. And I've unfortunately buried 2 people from suicide, one from jumping from a high place and one from a purposeful overdose. And I can say that certainly the members of family dealing with that, it doesn't really make any difference what method they choose. It's a question of dealing with the root problem rather than the symptom, and I would say that this is an argument dealing with the symptom, unfortunately, being a question of bridge deaths. And I'd like to suggest that maybe more appropriate than this idea, well, they don't really specify what their concepts are. I guess on reading the city's recommendations, what came to mind is this question of, we've seen in other jurisdictions where they've simply put up fences around buildings, and the idea of the Foxconn building in China where Apple had to put fences to prevent their employees from jumping off the roofs as the solution rather than dealing with the root problems comes to mind. I'd like to suggest that maybe in this case, what the city should be looking at is something similar to the call centers and call lines that we have advertised on the TTC platforms. I do, and I had actually printed it out and I didn't bring it up with me here, but any of you that have ridden the subway know that have seen the signs that start off with thinking of suicide. And my complaint with that sign is that my response is always, well, if I wasn't before, I certainly am now. I think we could have some signs around, and maybe the city could make the argument with some providers of telephone services to see to it that we end up with payphones available at either end of a bridge, that we have some signs there that say, need to talk, here's the number to call, that there are people available. And I think that that City Council could certainly benefit the people involved here by trying to pursue steps along that. So beyond certainly police being trained how to respond to those situations and having a good repertoire of tools to try and deal with people, and I'm all for that. But I think this is a very delicate situation where policing really are your last choice of respondents to these types of situations, that certainly if they're there, they have to deal with those situations on an unfortunately regular basis. And I feel for those people that have to deal with that, and whether they're successful or unsuccessful, they certainly take home a heavy burden at the end of the day from that. But I think we have to look at some other alternatives to dealing with the root causes of these problems, rather than the temptation to just try and prevent the symptoms and send people off to other places that are maybe just less visible and that we don't hear about as often, but that the outcome is the same. So, thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Colleagues, any questions of Chris? Thanks. We have a motion to to approve. Yeah. Okay. That's Councillor Carroll, seconded Councillor Lee. All in favor? Any contrary? Carried. So that takes care of the depositions. That brings us back to item number 5, is it right? So item number 5 is the Chief's Administration Review. This is the first Section 11 report to be made public. Councillor Carroll, you had some questions on that?
I do have some questions, because we're looking at this format. So we get our piece of this is that we get a report from the Chief of Police that you're reporting back to us basically on what the longer report from Tony Leparco from SIU says. I'm frustrated by the format here. I'm wondering if you can speak to this, because in the interim, from the time the investigation was done and the decision was made not to lay charges, there is so much swirling in the community. There is a letter in the newspaper written by a police officer and president of the Police Association that is more descriptive about Andrew Loku's whole day. And there doesn't seem to be room in this report to speak to that. There's a rumor swirling also out of the media. Mr. Cole wrote in a column that someone from CMHA who saw this video says something different than what the report says, which is that life-saving measures began immediately. How do we, in this reporting format, deal with those outstanding concerns in the community?
Well, a couple of things. First and foremost, that under the PSA 11.
Convict, send that killer cop to jail. The whole damn system is guilty as hell. Indict, convict, send that killer cop to jail. The whole damn system is guilty as hell. Mayor Tory, Police Chief Saunders, we are outraged. A year ago, Andrew Loku was murdered in his hallway. A year ago. A year ago, his family said goodbye to him from continents away. Shame. A year ago, we stood in this same exact spot, calling for justice for. Hey, that is a shame.
now, given the protest that just happened, that the reason earlier I got up and went and spoke to the folks is to make it clear to them that the reason we dispensed with all of the quick business items first and are now dealing with the Section 11 report on Andrew Loku is so that we could give it its due, so that we would have lots of time for the questions and the deputations, that there was no attempt on the part of the board to avoid this conversation, but rather to give it the time it should have by dispensing with quick business items first. And I thank you for managing the agenda that way.
Thank you, Councillor Carroll. You were interrupted in your discussion with
Well,
the chief.
actually, yeah, my question has been asked, and I'm ready for the chief's answer on how we're constrained by this Section 11 format.
So with the Section 11.2, I'm responsible to investigate the policy, service, and conduct of the officers for that event, and that's what we do. Now, there's a miscommunication or gap when people think that we have the evidence. We do not have the evidence. So when it comes to the question on, why can't we dispute the video versus what our investigation has shown us, we have to rely on the information the SIU provides us. They keep the evidence, and so there's a gap with that, with respect to that. And I believe that the evidence that they provide is truthful, because they have to be held accountable for what their actions are, and they have to investigate the criminal activities, if there are any, concerning this particular issue. Now, under this circumstance, they did a thorough investigation, as they do always, and they turned out to say that there was no criminality or no reasonable prospect of conviction of any criminal offense by the officers under the circumstances that they were put under. Now, with respect to the letter that Mr. McCormick put in, that doesn't fit the scope of 11.2. It simply doesn't. That's another form and another opportunity that we could maybe fix that in another avenue, but not within the 11.2. But what I can say as well is that the other concern with respect to what that person may have said outside of the scope of the investigation, I can't validate that. And that's something, once again, that will be going back to the SIU, because it would be directly related to the activities of the criminal investigation.
Yes,
Well,
you certainly
so,
may.
and I think that goes to my next question, because I think there's a frustration here that's part of the SIU process. Many people have asked me, why isn't that video on CNN or the Canadian equivalent right now? Because they're used to that. They're used to things showing up in those ways in other jurisdictions in the United States, but in particular. But I think what we need to understand, this SIU system means that as soon as you've invoked, immediately there was harm to Andrew Loku, so immediately SIU is invoked. You have a role within the Toronto Police Service that is, someone becomes the designated SIU liaison. So is the function of that liaison that at that point, because it's evoked the evidence, the reason you don't have the evidence is that liaison has to forward it on there, so it doesn't rest at any time in the police service?
No, the liaison makes sure that we are working within the protocol and with the rules that are prescribed under the SIU once they invoke their mandate. Our role is to do an administrative investigation. It is administrative. It is not criminal in any way, shape, or form. There is an external entity that does all of that. Ours is strictly administrative.
Right. And then lastly, there is frustration around this issue of Andrew Loku's residence. And it is noted in the report, the service was not aware that this was a CMHA building for persons with mental health conditions. First of all, I found that surprising, because my personal experience in my own ward, where I have halfway houses while the residents don't know where they are, the division generally does. So that was a surprising thing, but it also doesn't square with Mr. McCormick saying in the paper, police dealt with this person 3 hours previous, and then they drove him home to that address. So they knew they had a person escalating. So that question remains, why not, when you have the call for later on, why not call the mental health crisis response units, the MCIT, why were they not called on the way there as well?
Well, there are a couple of things that you need to consider. First and foremost, the investigation is based on the scope of the information that is given to the officers. And so the officers did not know who Mr. Loku was until after it was determined, after the actions or after the event occurred. So they went to a call for a person, a tenant, threatening to kill another tenant. And then the call got furthered with the person is now using a hammer and destroying things in a hallway. And so it wasn't identified as who the person was. So that's first and foremost. And the report doesn't say that the service wasn't aware of the location. It says the officers. So the officers that went to the scene had no idea what the residence was. And so they went with not knowing or not having that particular knowledge. Now, the other...
So that's maybe a problem in the report, because the report says the service was not aware. That was what generated my surprise, because that would mean nobody knows this is a CMHA building, and that wouldn't be.
No, the investigation is about the conduct of the officers. The officers did not know. They were the ones that responded. They were the ones that acted within the frame of the law, and they did not know. And that's what this investigation from a criminality perspective is about, as well as an administrative. Now, with the MCIT goes, they don't go to calls where violence is, where there's any harm to them, because we're going in with a nurse. So it's a trained officer that deals with mental health issues, but also a nurse. And so they will not, and it is not written or prescribed, that they will go to a call where violence is occurring. There has to be, they're more for the aftermath, for the maintenance, for the support, to make sure that people are still taking their medication, helping them if they need guidance to go to different agencies for more help or support. So that's the factor that the MCIT plays.
Okay, those are my questions.
Mayor Tory, you had some questions, and then Mr. Jeffers?
Thanks, Chief. I had two. One is we're charting a new course here in having this kind of report made public, which I think is a good thing. And I think this is the first one. And I was just wondering, would you expect that this would be the format? I guess ordinarily when you made a decision to make something public, you would have a discussion about this format, which is only modestly different than what we see, because you, for example, when it lists all these regulations and whether they were complied with, we see it in a kind of a grid format, and it's just listed here. But would you expect that this format would be the one that would be followed, or that there'd be some discussion perhaps? Because it's going really to Councillor Carroll's point. I understand the difference between, I think a lot of people expect you're going to be sort of conducting a parallel criminal investigation, when in fact the regulations say specifically the purpose of the Chief of Police's investigation is to review the policies of or services provided by the police force and the conduct of its police officers. And so as you said, the criminal investigation, as it were, is conducted by someone else deliberately, so that it's an independent person doing that. Would you expect that there'd be any change to the content or format of these, given that now that they're in the public domain, it raises some of the questions that Councillor Carroll raised, because there's information that gets out there, correct or incorrect, it's out there, and questions people are asking, that at the moment neither the report of the SIU nor the report of the your report answer. I mean, not that, that they, well, I mean, I guess, yeah, there is no answer. Have you given any thought to whether...
Well, absolutely, and I understand the frustration with the transparency piece and what we're trying to obtain here. So it's open for discussion, and I'm sure that we can have a conversation to see what best fits. But there's also a misunderstanding. I think that the general public thinks that once the SIU conduct their investigation, they're done, that I get access to this 100-page document, and then I narrow it down to a page. My reports that I get back from the SIU are like a page and a half, if I'm not. It's a page. It's usually a page or a page and a half. So from that, we extract it to create this. And so we don't have a lot of information that is provided to. So it's not us holding back information. It's us working within the governance that we have to work within right now. But, the other issues, I certainly wouldn't mind sitting down and having the conversation, seeing what we can do to include, I guess, a fulsome account of other aspects that are outside of the 11.2. But I would suggest that that's done in another format.
My second question, Mr. Chair, was this. If you look at this phrase, conduct of its police officers, and it's a delicate question, but I think it needs to be asked. If you look at the heart of what was being protested here this afternoon, it is the suggestion that has been made that there was an element of racism involved in the act. And of course, I look at all these regulations about discharging a firearm and use of force reports and so on, and they are what I will call, fairly technical regulations that apply to the way in which an officer should conduct himself or herself. In an instance like this, where these kinds of suggestions are made and where you're mandated to review the conduct of your police officers, is there a way in which, because I'm sure there's somewhere in the sort of oath of office, if nothing else, that an officer swears that they will conduct themselves without, you know, any thought of discrimination, et cetera, and that you should be examining that so that, again, it's an unanswered allegation that's out there, and unanswered allegations tend to be harmful to everybody because the people making them have no satisfaction, the people against whom they're made, so I just ask you that kind of question. It's a delicate question, but I think in this case, that's one of the sort of core elements of what's being discussed here.
And that's fair. And to answer that, sir, when we say conduct, we mean every aspect of the officer's behavior. Because at the end of the day, we try to look at what can we do to improve on our response. And is there better equipment out there that can be used? Do we modify our training? Do we change our procedures? Do we have a revisit on the policy? So the conduct aspect is absolutely looked at from every single possible lens that a police officer would have to perform in.
Again, it's one of those things where it may well be the case that just an acknowledgement of that, which is implicit in some respects,
Yes.
but you've just said so, would be a good addition to the report so that people could know that you thought about and considered that issue, because it's out there so much being discussed.
Sure, I'll extract the definition of what
I mean,
we
and I
mean
would
by
say that if
conduct.
any other kind of discrimination or so on, it
Yes.
doesn't matter. It's just one of those things that's out there as an issue. Thank you.
That's fair, thank you.
Mr. Jeffers?
Yes, sir, Chief. As members of the board, of course, we have a responsibility to interpret and let people know what we think, what's happening within the TPS, right? And the question of when Shelley Carroll asked or made the comment about that they know that it was, the fact that it was, a place where people with mental health problems were located. However, does it, from an operational standpoint, if within a division, especially when in the Transformational Task Force we're looking at amalgamating divisions and so forth, am I to understand that the officers who are in those divisions are not aware of the different hot points, if you may, within that division? Do they get an orientation about what is there and what the implications are during their patrols and that sort of thing?
Well, it gives me an opportunity to clarify a point where I was incorrect in the fact that the service was not made aware that this was a CMHA location. It says here in evidence that, in fact, the CMHA indicated that their organization expressly did not advise the TPS of their clients living at Mr. Loku's building because they did not want the location to become known as the mental health housing location. And it goes on and talks about stigma and things like that. So it gives us an opportunity to look at some of the gaps that are out there that exist that we may need to have a look at and visit. So it's one thing to look at and measure our response. It's another thing to look at the other agencies that work with us, that need to give us information so that we do have a fulsome idea of what we're dealing with when we arrive on scene.
The other follow-up question I have is that I certainly have been asked, it's difficult for the public to understand with the training that your officers receive, and the fact that, as reported, and you could correct me if I'm wrong, that Mr. Loko was 3 meters away from the two officers who are presumably trained. And in that kind of a situation, is there a procedural, do they have to react a certain way in their training? Are they taught how to disarm someone who, especially with a non-lethal weapon? Just before you respond to that, is that it's very difficult for us, as I have been certainly asked by a number of people, people in the community as well, that why would that be such a difficult proposition for two officers 3 meters away, trained in all of that? Why would that be a lethal force?
Well, I think this does invoke the conversations for, are there other tools, are there other equipment that officers can be supplied with, so that when they're put in this situation, they have an opportunity to, have us do our zero harm, no death, which is what we're trying to strive towards. So I would strongly urge that when you look at our training first and foremost talks about de-escalation, teaches de-escalation, talks about judgment training, and all of these other factors, which are factors that we never had before. We've added a third day of training specifically to deal with people that live with mental illness. And at the end of the day, when you look at the criminal code and the use of force and our use of force model that we have, an officer is by law allowed to use as much force as necessary. So in this case, when we have an over 200-pound man with a hammer coming towards the officers, when you fear that there is imminent danger that could occur, you can use as much force as necessary. And so that is the way things are designed. So I really do think that if you look at the training, we're always looking for opportunities to see, can it be done better? Can we have better tools to assist so that under these circumstances, we have an opportunity not to have a fatal outcome?
Well,
Yep.
so if I may,
Follow up, Ken? Yep.
this situation, has to be a learning situation, right? And based on what has occurred, what in your opinion are some of the major learning opportunities we have from this to ensure that it doesn't happen this way in that situation? Is there something that you can just share with us?
Well, we continuously do comprehensive training to see what we can do to be better. We've implemented the SOC round now as a less lethal option, so there are more of them that are out there. If you're going to ask me if I think officers should have tasers, I think that's a discussion that we need to have. So whatever less lethal options that are out there that we can equip our officers with, so that when they understand they're dealing with a person in crisis, and whenever a person is armed with a weapon other than a firearm, the officers have a different tool that they can use that has a less lethal outcome.
And this happened in July of last year, and the SOC round was introduced in March of this year. But again, I guess, Chief, there's no guarantee, since they didn't know they were going to a mental health. Would they have used a different approach if they'd had the SOC round available, do you think, or is that just
Well, I don't
speculation?
want to get into hypothetics. The inquest, once again, will come out, and we'll put all of these things on at the table. But I will say that shortly after this incident, I had a quick review and said we need more or less lethal options out there for the frontline officers, because we're doing this 24,000 times a year.
Yeah. Mayor Tory?
Just following along that line, as we try to sort of make these reports better for you and for everybody, including, of course, the public, is there any merit in having, I presume if you'd found sort of some non-compliance under one of these headings of the regulations, you would have made some comment on that. And I just wondered, even if you didn't, I was thinking, as we talked earlier on about technology and how we use that if there had been some kind of feature on our dispatch system that had somehow matched up the fact that Mr. Loku was taken back to that building earlier in the day in an agitated state by the police who returned him home, and that if that had sort of popped up automatically because there was something that said if something happens within a very short period of time in the same place, they didn't know his name, obviously the second time around, but that there was an incident involving somebody that day, that it might have caused people to think, well, maybe we need a different, like we need one of the mobile, crisis intervention teams to come right away. And I realize, again, they can't necessarily come as fast as they're needed. But I just wonder if there's some things like that might occur to you, or even if you'd use these sometimes as an opportunity to make a comment about some shortcomings that exist in the mental health system that would help us to better deal with situations like this, as opposed to having the police have to be called. I'm just trying to think of ways in which we can make these reports really useful, both as a tool of accountability, but also as a tool of sort of addressing, policing and other issues that relate to the care of people who are struggling, people who are, emotionally disturbed or just any people that come into contact with the police?
Well, I will say that there are very few police agencies or law enforcement agencies that have scrutinized the issue on how to deal with people living with mental health issues any more than us. I think we are leaders when it comes to it, which is where we've got the Akabuchi report that's out there. We've implemented so many things. We've had so many committees that we've put together to figure out what we can do for the zero harm, no death. And, we've also gone through a lot of inquests, and those inquests provide a lot of information on recommendations. And so on the go forward, I really strongly urge that we do listen to these results and sit down and figure out what we can do better.
But I'm not sure if you followed my question, because it was more to sort of say, let's pick another example other than him. But if you had two calls to the same house in the same day.
But this wasn't a house. This was a
No, I
low-rise,
understand. But if you
so-
did have two calls to the same house, right now I presume that there wouldn't be anything that would pop up automatically on the computer where people get the details. And I'm just thinking that maybe this causes us to think about these things and say, well, at least if it popped up, that it was the second time in a day that the police had been at this. I realize they didn't know it was this man, but I'm thinking of ways in which we can use technology to police better and to give us a bit of a heads up that if it's the second time in a day and it may be different officers going, that you just might want to be thinking, well, what happened the first time?
Yeah, I think I understand where you're going with that. Yeah. With a house, I would say that would be something that would be healthy. With a high rise or low rise, I don't think that would have changed anything. But I will say that there are other entities, privacy commissioner, that are saying, you know what? No, you don't label people because you can't stigmatize.
Yeah,
and
I
so,
get that.
So there are a lot of things that are contradictory right now, and we need to sit down collectively and figure out what is the best path and what is the best direction that we need to move forward on it.
Mr. Jeffers, did you have any? You look
No, I
like
was
you
just
had
going to
your
make
hand
a
up.
motion.
Okay, well, Councilor Carroll, you have a motion you want to?
Yeah, are we going into speaking? Okay.
Yep.
There are no more questions? Okay. Yes, I gave a motion to Deirdre about, it's about the handling of video storage. And I think it's, I don't know if you can put it up on the screen or if it's typed or what, but it's about the handling, and we're about to get another report on the motherlode of collections of videos. Once we have body-worn cameras, we're going to have video coming out of our ears. And so I think perhaps the report back should come in conjunction with that, which is coming up very soon. But Chief Saunders included in his report what I think is sort of the outstanding issue left for Mr. Leparco, and he's highlighted it here, so I think it behooves us to react to it. While there is an explanation that the officers are doing what they're supposed to do, I frankly don't think it's enough. I think what we need to have as a board is the comfort that we're putting in place procedures that make it very clear to officers that if you are sent to obtain a video, it's not so to assess it and look at it. You are vulnerable to the technology the minute you crack it open and start looking at it. As far as I'm concerned, err on the side of caution and gather all the video there is to be gathered, but then you take it to the place where you have multiple people on hand witnessing the assessment of said video. So I just want to know if we're in line with the chief in worrying about that. I'd like to see what sort of procedural orders are just going to make sure that we're never again vulnerable to the amount of rumor, suspicion, innuendo, all those things that exist in the community exist because we don't have a system whereby that video is one day going to show up in the CBC News. It's not. So we are at the mercy of all of the figures of authority who will see the video and then will bury it somewhere, and we will never have a way to deal away with our concerns about what really happened. We won't ever get to see it. So I want to know that when it is seen by all the appropriate players in the room, and I think it's best if the chief outlines for us how to make that possible. And I really think we should have that when we start talking about body-worn cameras, because we're going to be sitting on a mountain of video footage. And what happens to that? Where is it stored? Who does it implicate? How do we know that it's actually being stored in such a way that it is exactly as recorded for all eternity? We need to have some comfort on those things. I'm on the whole report, Mr. Chair. I'm like everyone else, heartbroken on this. On the one hand, I'm surprised that the service, and particularly locally, aren't crystal clear on where they do have a residence in the neighborhood where they may see mental health complaints on a more frequent basis. But at the same time, that shouldn't be an issue, because mental health crisis doesn't mean you've been exhibiting it all along. You could be a person who was perfectly fine in the eyes of the community for a long, long time and are suddenly taken ill, are suddenly in that type of mental health crisis. Often we don't see it coming. Often we don't know who that person is. And so the response, when you get there to that, the address shouldn't matter. We want to know that the response is, as my fellow board member says, as we've already pointed out of this loss, there has to be some learning, and that's what we want to know most of all, is that we learn something about how we respond when we get there, no matter what address it is. Are we good? Would this ever have happened if we had the sock round, and how will that change? And most of all, how do we handle the evidence so that we can give the community the comfort that we know exactly what happened, and we have all of the resources we need to ensure that this does never happen again?
Okay. Victoria, anything?
I would only like to say, not with regard, that it's really more again with regard to these reports going forward, but it includes this one, that just on Councillor Carroll's last comment, which was about out of these terrible tragedies has to come some learning. And I think it would be useful if there was some section of the report that, where you could say, well, fine, on the checklist, all of the regulations have been complied with, but there are some thoughts that come out of it as to how we could do better, or some tools we need, or some. And I think I heard you earlier not resisting the notion that we should do that, because out of each of these, and thank God there aren't very many of them that involve people losing their lives in encounters with the police, but that there are some things, whether it's the kind of thing I talked about, which I was just thinking out loud about, using technology as we've been discussing all day, or just something because I'm sure there must be, and I think it would be useful to us to make sure we got the learning, all of us, I mean the board members, the police service members, because there's always going to be something that we could do better, or do differently, or have another tool, or get a legislative change, or make a comment with respect to something somebody else might do. So it's just a thought.
Mr. Jeffers, any comments further?
Yes, I think it's really important for us to reflect and also take some action on this, and that is that, I mean, we are covered by the Ontario Act, Police Services Act, which requires certain kinds of training in certain situations, etc. Right? I think we also need to look at a policy, at the risk of sometimes the fine line between operations and policies. I think we need to look at a policy that deals with what should occur, should occur, what should be done when we have a situation where a tragedy like this occurs, and there's a domino effect of people being justifiably angry and protesting and feeling very frustrated, and putting the chief in a position where he at times will have to take a leadership position, which may or may not be inconsistent with past practices. So I think part of the reference point ought to be a policy that states what happens what we expect the services to do in the event of a tragedy like this, a protest, and all the, as I said, the domino effect of that. Because when you look over the years and you see the way in which different chiefs of police of the services have responded, it is not always consistent. And so it really puts people's expectations that are sometimes people are confused because expectations vary from one leader to another, to another. And I think I would like to make a motion that the board examines a policy on how we manage tragedies of this nature and the domino effect of protests and what roles, what role we play in all of this. And that this be done in consultation with the appropriate sources externally and internally.
I think that's beyond the discussion right here with the Section 11s, as Mayor Tory, I think, pointed out at the very beginning. I think this is the first one that we have seen out of the new transparency. Councillor Carroll is talking about something quite different, so we have potentially several motions on the table here. One is Councillor Carroll's, that the chief report back in conjunction with pending report on body-worn cameras, the result of video footage, on what procedural orders will ensure the service will not be vulnerable to allegations of tampering with video evidence. Colleagues, Councillor Carroll, you want to put that forward? Colleagues, are you comfortable with that? And if so, may I have a seconder? Councillor Lee, all in favor? Any contrary? Okay, carried. The second one, I guess, Mayor Tory, comes from your questions, and that would be that we have seen this as a, sorry.
Given an opportunity to speak.
Yep.
It's just in essence with this request or this motion, in essence, it is a criminal act to tamper with evidence if that is what is found. So are you putting a motion that is something to deal with the criminal code? Because we have within our procedures, we work under the criminal code.
Yeah.
So I was struggling with what word to put. Allegations does invoke that. But to me, it's more than allegations. It's rumors, it's out there. There are things that we have no way of defending as a board or as an institution because of the way this evidence is matched. So if the word allegations is a problem, then we need to change it to something that invokes less the criminal code. But how do we ensure, what procedure can we have in place to make it clear to the community that no video was cracked open and had a look at without all the appropriate people in the room?
What if it said allegations arising out of the handling of video evidence?
Let's let Mark respond here.
Well,
The egregious word is tampering. The officers did not tamper with evidence.
No, and I'm not saying they did. I'm saying that I don't have a way to give the community comfort that they didn't. I don't have a way unless I can say to them, I as a board, as a body of governance, have clarified officially that this is what happens when it's time to look at video evidence. This is who's in the room, this is who saw it, and this is where it will be stored. I don't have the ability to say that to the community on your behalf right now. And I would like it if somebody brought to the board those things so that henceforth I'd be able to say those things and give people some comfort.
Mayor Tory, before I come to you, colleagues, I'd ask you to think we have in effect out of this first attempt to bring the Section 11s out of confidential realm into a public realm. It's really spawned 3 separate discussions, one out of this particular instance. I wonder if we can wrap it up all into one, to have the chief to come back to us that would encompass all of these
Well,
things,
I want
or do we want to deal with them separately, Shelley?
I want my motion on the books.
Okay.
I want it to be a matter of public record that I asked
Okay,
for this.
then-
However, if there's concern that I'm saying something that makes it look like I think something criminal happened, perhaps we want to get a legal opinion on how it should be worded. But I want this to be a standalone motion because it's kind of a standalone concern in the SIU report.
Yes,
and I think the community wants to see that we took some action here.
Mayor Tory?
And I think the point the chief is making, Mr. Chair, is that the word tampering has a particular legal, imprimatur meaning to it that could suggest criminal conduct. I think if we were to reopen this, because we passed it already, and change it to say allegations, for example, arising out of the handling of video evidence, I'm prepared to accept the fact that also what you were talking about, Councillor Carroll, I think, was I know if I was to walk in and somebody said to me, well, secure that piece of video equipment, and I don't think police officers are particularly trained on dealing with video equipment, the odds of my pushing a button that would cause something bad to happen, are and I think and then, or have some other person, but just secure it by putting a box around it or something until somebody can come who can dismantle it without, or take it away without causing any harm. So I think it's the use of the word tampering, and I understand the chief's concern about that because it's a word
So, just as we look at this, and yes, we have passed it, we can always revisit it because we want to get it right. But frankly, nothing the chief does can prevent allegations at any time.
Right, so if you want to wordsmith it, fine, as long as it's a standalone motion and it's clear what I'm asking in an undertaking.
Yeah, because tampering implies malintent, right? And that could be a lightning rod for a lot of different things,
Right.
And I understand that point of view. So, but I think Shelley's point is really
I want to change allegations to suspicions, because that's the
No.
problem. There is a strong community suspicion, and for whatever reason. So if you want to wordsmith it, fine, but we have to address this.
Chief Saunders?
Okay, so we've identified a gap, and the gap is we have to work around the information that is given to us, but we don't see to validate. And I think that's what Councillor Carroll is trying to say. But is this the right form? Because it's the SIU that holds that information, not us. So whatever we do here at the end of the day isn't going to compel the SIU to say, now here you go. So there has to be a meeting held somewhere else once the gap is identified, and then figure out how we structure something in accordance to what the request is.
Which brings me back, Shelley, to recognizing the implications of this sentence and the uniqueness of this report. If we should not have a broader discussion, a motion which asks the chief to come back to us with Section 11s that would take care of this type of thing in the future, but also, Mr. Jeffers, your concern about how it responds to the public. We need further discussion, I think, about the Section 11s, given that this is a first attempt to bring them before the public.
Sorry, but if you think you need a meeting and something broad to get at what I'm asking for, then I'm not making myself clear. Because what I want is quite precise, quite specific, and I want it.
Okay,
And
then
you voted to
express
give it to me.
No, but then
So I
express
want it.
Okay, we have identified
It's
some
not broad at
problems
all.
with it.
It's quite specific. I want to know, in a thing like this, if someone says, hey, they had a video in that hallway, someone go get that video. How many people go? Who's allowed to view the footage? Who's in the room when they do it? So that later on, when the community says, we heard this about the video, we can say how many people saw it. I'm sorry I can't show it to you because it's now owned by the SIU. But it wasn't one or two officers. It was never looked at until there was a tech in the room and however many important people.
Would it make sense
That's
then,
quite
Councillor
specific.
Carroll, to say that, and let's uncouple it from the body-worn cameras, which is in some ways a different issue. How would the chief come forward with?
Well, I could put a date on it. I just thought since that is coming up soon and we'll be talking about video that day, that there was a certain symmetry to it. But if you want me to take out the body-worn cameras, then I'll put a date there. I want it, in the August board meeting, I want this comment.
Mayor Torres?
Mr. Chairman, I'll just say respectfully, I actually think it being included in the body-worn cameras report is quite sensible, because we're dealing with a different era now where video evidence and video content is something that is going to become, it already has become increasingly a part of both evidence, but also accountability for police, and for that matter, it's going to be as often as not something that's going to assist them in explaining what happened at a given place they were. And I think that Councillor Carroll's on the right tack here. Instead of having the police write 2 reports, our police officers have them write 1, and speak to the question of how you handle this kind of evidence, and in particular, how you avoid either the appearance or in actual fact, I'm sure all of the time, accidentally, somebody, like, as I say, if I walked in and touched any of this stuff, the chances are about 75% that I pushed the wrong button and erased
what we're
something.
really,
Well, all right, 100, that's
so
fine.
what we're really asking is, what procedures would be put in place by the chief to ensure the appropriate handling of video footage. So, and get away from the allegations of tampering or any of that stuff. Is that fair? Sure. Carl, we got it right?
Wouldn't you just want to know what procedures exist for the handling of video? Isn't that the essence of what you want, the information you want to have happen?
I'm trying to capture the essence of the SIU report that says that perhaps it needs improvement. So I want more than what happened on the night of Andrew Loku's death. I want to know what we're doing from now on, given what Mr. Leparco said, and I'm assuming we'll want something better. I'm assuming we won't want just 2 officers to assess it on site where they go to get it, making themselves quite vulnerable because there were only 2 of them there. I'm assuming that we will want some enhanced procedure, and I'm giving the chief the opportunity to offer up his enhancement based on Mr. Leparco's comments.
I'd just like to point out the 2 possible levels of jurisdiction here. One is there's a review of the Police Services Act right now, which can support that point as well. And of course, the jurisdiction where the board has can of course make this motion to do that, right? So I see it as a 2-pronged, because we have been asked for recommendations of the to make recommendations about the review of the act, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes, we have.
And so perhaps that can strengthen.
But I think it starts here with this, and I think Shelley's right. We do need something to address it. I'm just trying, Shelley, to recognizing that we passed this. We did it quite quickly. The word tampering, I think, has a connotation that we don't really want, but yet we want to get your motion included. So how do we, as a wordsmith, got a better approach here?
Absolutely wordsmith, because if anyone's leaving this room thinking that my motion is designed to accuse them of tampering, it's not.
Yeah.
But there's this inability to prove that that was not the case. Well, what a lawyerly way of wordsmithing. No, I'm quite fine with it. I'm just trying to diffuse the tension, shall we say. But the suggestion that it be what procedures will govern the handling of video evidence and the extent to which the procedures address the concerns of Mr. Leparco, I think is quite clear, because the public has seen the concerns of Mr. Leparco. The video concerns are part of the shortened version of the SIU report they got. And so I can live with this.
Okay.
Yeah.
So can we?
Thank you so much.
Ken, you look like you have something that's about to burst out.
Yeah, I'm good with that. I'm good with that.
Okay.
We just have to fix the record somehow, right?
You would advise me that we will all support this, but you would advise me, as my constitutional advisor, Shelley would advise me to reopen it. Of course you would. Yeah, exactly. My own Baskerville walking dictionary of orders. To heck with Roberts.
Yes, I will forever regret having told my maiden name to Chair Pringle.
We're gonna do that next. We'll do one at a time, as you said. Let's get them done. And they're all connected with this. We also have to talk about, John, about the future of Section 11s, and is this the direction they're gonna take? Right. Okay. Do you want, should we cover them both at the same time, can we? Or separately? We should do it separately. They're quite different. Yeah. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I think we're about to. So the first one is that the chief report back in conjunction with the pending body-worn cameras and the resulting video footage on the procedures that govern the handling of video evidence to the extent of which the procedures address the concerns of Mr. Leparco. Shelley, does that capture everything that you wish?
Well, since everybody picked on my motion, can I now pick on Ken's motion?
We're doing one at a time.
Well, while they're on the board, I just think the issue of domino effect, we know what it means in this room right now today because we were all sitting here. But that on the books, I think you want to be clear, and it should say something to the effect of when there is a prominent community outcry or something like that, because domino effect could mean copycat crimes or something like that. And that what you mean is when there is a huge community response, what's the protocol going forward? Things of that nature.
So I was trying to, guys, I was trying to deal with them one at a time, Shelley, because I
Okay,
think they're
one at a
quite
time. There
different.
you go.
Do we capture,
Yeah.
so we are
Yeah.
making null and void. The first one is that the previous vote, we now make null and void. Reopen it, as Councillor Lee says. So we
Yes.
agree to that. You're proposing the top paragraph that ends with the word Leparco.
There is one thing missing from it. It does not, there's nothing future tense in there. So it's on the procedures that govern the handling of video evidence. I'm not actually looking for what the policy was the night Andrew Loku died. I'm looking for how have we improved it since.
Yeah.
So there's nothing future on the procedures that will govern the handling of video evidence, or something that
Just in the
gives
future?
the chief the opportunity to offer us improvements.
That will govern?
Yeah.
Just change that will govern. That will govern the handling. No, that will is right there. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, can we just restrict it to the board discussion here? Councillor Carroll, is that acceptable? Okay, so you are proposing that, seconded by Councillor Lee, I believe it was, wasn't it? Councillor Lee, are you still comfortable with that? Jen? Second? Yeah, so we're reopening it where the Councillor Carroll is proposing this amended. You are seconding it. All in favor? Any contrary? Carried unanimously. The second motion is the one, Ken, that you are proposing. Yep. And I think it needs to be tightened up because I agree with Councillor Carroll that domino effect, there's a bunch of things there that.
Well, the domino effect would be on communities, and I wanted to get in there a timely manner, dealing with it in a timely manner, and the domino effect really implies what the effect on various communities. So, including protests, right?
Yeah, I think we need to flesh out, I mean, a policy is a direction to the chief, and I'm not sure I get it. You know, I think I get what you're trying to get at, but I'm not sure how, you know, what we would, you know, maybe the answer is that I still think we, and Mark, I still think, you know, we've got one Section 11 report, the one on Andrew Loco. The reality is that we have these on a relatively regular basis. We've decided as a board we want them to be in the public domain. This is a first cut at that. I would say, Ken, that we want to take a vote directing the chief or requesting of the chief that he come back to us with the regular procedures, including what he might recommend, where the tragic nature of an event may have a particular impact on the community and or communities, and how we would propose to handle that.
In a timely manner.
On a timely manner. Are we comfortable with that? Councillor Carroll, you're my advisor. You seem to be.
I'm frustrated. The term domino effect, we're dancing around.
We're not going to use domino effect.
Okay. So are we going to see what we're using before we vote on it? Or, okay.
We're trying to write it. We're trying to write it out now.
I just always remember in my councillor orientation training, it said when writing motions, well, what seems really meaningful right now has to stand on the books for the next 100 years. So use language that will be understood later, and I'm not sure that that would be. Yeah.
Committee protocol. Let's see.
Right. I don't really need to. I was the one that held it. I just wanted to point out that the Mental Health External Evaluation Committee is kind of a very, make sure you look at the list of people who have signed up to help us with this. And it's the first time the service is really looking at an external evaluator on a regular basis. So in many ways, it's hugely complementary to what we're doing on the task force in talking about ongoing evaluation, self-evaluation, continuous improvement. This is an external. So I just wanted you to be aware you also approved, because some of these people travel from out of town to get here to spend the time. I think it's very, very important. I've sat in on some of the work that's been done. Is excellent. So I just really wanted to point that out to you, and not just run right by it. Mayor Tory?
Just because I think even you, Mr. Chair, are being a bit modest about this. Am I not correct that, first of all, I can speak because I've had some involvement with mental health issues over the years. I mean, these are the best people in the country, to come and help us. But secondly, I think I was told maybe by one of them that I saw yesterday that this may be the first time in Canada or in North America that any police service has subjected itself to this kind of external evaluation.
We're not sure about that, but we think that's true.
So. Yeah. So I just think it's worthy of, and quite appropriate we should be. It's consistent with
I agree. I mean, look at Mark, what is it, 32,000 calls we get a year on one aspect of mental health or another?
It's on average, it's 24,000 and growing.
Okay, thank you. So with that, the point out, motion to receive, yes, Councillor Carroll?
Quick question, because I don't know all the people on the panel, so I may be missing it, but, so I'll take your word for it. Is the panel fully diverse, and does that extend all the way to the Aboriginal community?
I don't,
I know that, I'm not asking you to restrike,
There
I know
so
that,
let me answer another way.
Yeah.
Jim Bartleman was on originally, and after the first session, Jim said, listen, I just live too far away to come on a regular basis, and his concern was more the north. He applauds what we're doing, but, so the answer is we've tried to take that into account.
oh, so is he going to be an advisor off
No,
and on, or is that-
no,
oh,
he just,
okay.
he came for the first one, but
Okay, so,
Sandy,
I
do you
know
want to
that, I
elaborate
know
further?
that Fiona Crean.
Sorry,
had-
just one.
yeah.
When James Bartleman was on the committee, he did promote some of those questions of the Aboriginal experience, and they have been incorporated into terms of reference what we're looking at, so that is part of what we're looking at.
Okay. I know that Fiona Crean has some professional experience earlier in her career. I just wondered if they were, represented as people. Okay.
And this, Shelley, again, this is meant to be an annual evaluation. The object of the exercise is, that, as you know, we have, in fact, Pat Capone and I co-chair the subcommittee on mental health. That's really a working committee that works with Mike Federico and his team to make sure that we've understood, we've got the best practices, et cetera, et cetera. But the desire was to have a blue ribbon panel that would look at what we're doing once a year, and I thought evaluate us. Well, we had a great discussion about evaluation. What does that really mean? How can we do it? Blah, blah, blah. So it will, I think, get down to, we really like what you're doing in this area, but we think more work in the other area. That gives our subcommittee and the service the opportunity over the next 12 months to focus on being better. But it also has other people, but it's envisaged that the makeup of that committee might change from year to year, so. Okay?
It just gets overlooked in Canada.
Yeah.
We
So.
have the largest concentration.
With that, so that is number 6, motion to receive. Councillor Carroll, seconded. Councillor Lee, all in favor. Any contrary? Thank you, carried unanimously. That gets us to item number 9, towing. And who wanted to hold that? I've forgotten. Yeah, it was, Chief, I have a question about the zone number 2. Is there an evaluation that will be done further? I mean, looking at the number of problems they had per sample size, it would beg a question for further analysis. What do you do from here, guys?
Yeah, stand by, please. Okay, I have Superintendent Jones.
Good afternoon, Chair, Chief, members of the board. This is a prime example of showing that the auditing works by the members of my staff. When they went through the invoices, they did determine that there was an administrative error that had been undertaken by the company when they notified the municipal licensing of the posted rates for medium tows. And our folks, when they did the audit, located, these are all just dealing with medium tows.
Yeah.
As soon as that was identified, we went through and we audited all of the medium tows for the year in process. We identified any over expenditures, and they have been refunded to the individuals. It was brought to the attention of the management of the towing company. They are aware of it, and my pound officers continue on a daily basis to make sure that as medium tows invoices are coming in, that in fact they are being charged at the correct rate.
So you've identified it from the audit. You presented to us the audit. We identified it, but you've already acted on it.
That's correct.
Thank you. Questions, Councillor Lee?
Now, what I heard was that then they did reviewed all the charges, not just the ones that were found.
No, we audited all the invoices in relation to medium tows, which is where the administrative error was in terms of the
How
rate.
about the other tolls? Could there have been overcharges on the other tolls?
No, all the other tows were correctly based on the rates that have been posted in municipal licensing.
Thank you.
So any other questions? If not, may I have a motion to receive? Councillor Carroll, seconded Mr. Jeffers. All in favor? Any contrary? Carried unanimously. I think that just waits for this, and then 17 and 18 and 17, I'm going to step away. In fact, Councillor Lee, I'm going to turn the chair over to you as soon as we do this. We're just waiting for this. And then you and I are going to go 17 and 18. You do what you want. Okay.
Because there's one valuation.
Oh, yes. No, yeah, totally. And this is the 18, I have the, yeah, okay. So are you guys ready, or you've got a few? Okay. Councillor Carroll, we will take a 2-minute break if you wish. Yeah, okay, good. Reconvene, Mayor Tory. Can someone go and find Councillor Carroll, please?
How are you going to define significant public concern? I don't want to get put in a corner here, and I don't want to come across as evasive, but that second request doesn't have the clarity that I need.
Well, Chief, the basis of that is that it's a question of when you have a public protest, and that happens, unfortunately, too often sometimes. But you're placed in a position where you have to make decisions regarding whether you talk to protesters or not, that sort of thing, right? When you do that, whether it's through the media, directly in your office, that sort of thing. So the spirit of all of this is really to have a reference or format where, when these things occur, that's why I use the whole thing about domino effect, in that you have protests, you have media stuff, you have all of that, right? And so it puts you in a position of having to take some action on this, which may vary from protest to protest.
And there lies my problem with the ambiguity. We do over, just so I can clear, we have over 700 protests a year, Chair. And so what's the starting point and what's the finishing point? Absolutely. I've got protests that are happening every day, and to each and every one of them, they're significant.
Well, no, other than that we take it out, because Ken, to my friend Ken, Mr. Chair, I'd simply say that I wouldn't, I don't know whether we're allowed to abstain at this board. At City Council, you can. It's either yes or no, but I wouldn't know. Like, it's difficult for the chief to present as some sort of template, checklist against which he can tell us how he's going to respond to circumstances he can't predict. Like, who would have known in the case of this one that what happened, and the next one will be different than that. And so I understand your point, which is to sort of try and be on top of these things more. So I just think that until maybe what we should do is think about this some more and not try to pass something today that...
A little bit of compromise, which is that we do need to pass the first part.
Yes.
But that requires the chief to come back, Ken, and if you can work out the right wording at that time,
I could do that.
we can then do that. So, Carl, thank you for your hours of trying to slave it away, but no, I'm fooling you.
Sometimes I'm complex.
So, just don't charge us for it.
It's just difficult to articulate.
But if we could just, Deirdre, take out 2, that the chief report back on the future format of section 11 reports, for what meeting?
Usually 3 months works.
I'm sorry?
3 months, please.
Okay. Okay, that the chief report back
All in favor?
on the future format of section 11 reports for the September 2016 meeting. A proposer for that?
Well,
Mayor Tory?
Sure.
Seconder? Councillor Lee? All in favor? Any opposed? Carried unanimously. Now, Chair Lee, if I can turn the chair over to you. I think we have 2 remaining items, Deirdre, 17 and 18. And I have a conflict on one of them, and I'm just going to turn the chair over. It's all yours. You can even have a gavel. Oh, yeah?
Thank you very much, Chair Pringle. And so we will address 17. Any questions, any speakers on that? But I'm going to propose that we defer 17. And the reason why myself and the chair had discussed this is that TTF suggested we realign, reorganize. And here we are going ahead renovating one of the stations without, that's right, for a lot of money. Yeah. So I would suggest that we defer this unless, yes. Mr. Vezza, well.
This is a project that has started. In fact, we started it a year ago. And I know there was discussion in the TTF report around 52 division. We are looking at repurposing that division, perhaps for different uses within the service. So it's a project that started, was approved as part of our program probably 2 years ago, and a project that's well underway. And so deferring at this point is really not doable.
I would then have a separate question, which maybe we could ask Tony to
Tom.
help us with, Mr. Chair. When you say started, I understand a lot of the design work and so on, and look, I have no problem with the project per se, but when you just said that we were going to perhaps repurpose the building, what I don't want to see us do is spend $8 million on what amounts to renovating it and making it accessible and all that now, and then turning around a year and a half from now and repurposing it to spend another $8 million on doing what we just did. And then the second concern I have, which is just process. When you say it's already started, I would presume that the project was authorized as part of the capital budget. And now, I don't know how it could have started if it's these people doing the work, because the awarding of the contract to them hasn't been approved yet. It's just in front of us right now.
No, actually, the awarding of the contract occurred in October of 2015.
So what's this here then?
This is really to coordinate work that the city wants to do on that building as well, and rather than the two of us do the work, we're coordinating and doing it as part of the contract that already exists. The construction is actually already underway, and we're planning to complete the construction by the end of this year, and it's really infrastructure work that brings the building up to necessary state of good repairs.
Okay, I follow all that, but let me just look at the plain wording of the recommendation. The board award the contract for construction services, lump cost 8.2. I'm sorry, you're quite
So
right.
it's 17B.
The amendment, okay, $400,000. And so, well, I think the point still stands though, which is, albeit that the contract is underway, we're adding $400,000 to do certain things. Would you be spending that $8 million in the same manner today if you knew that we were looking at repurposing the division and/or transforming the police service?
Based on what we know from discussions that we've had, preliminary discussions as part of the task force, there is going to be a purpose for that building. It may not be as a frontline operation, but it will be a building that have already identified other functions that could go into that building.
And these renovations are not inconsistent with that purpose, as best you know what it might be?
They're actually going to, it's consistent. I don't think it's
When I
gonna-
saw it was
we're not going to spend more, I think I know where you're going. We're not going to spend then another $8 million to bring it up to what the new tenant, if I can call it that, would be. So this is really infrastructure work, and we'll work within the building envelope that we have.
Councillor Carroll?
Yeah, if I can just add, it's possible that the chair and the vice chair don't remember, but we really discussed 52, because we already knew we were going to strike a task force. We really did talk about 52, and you may not recall, during the budget process back in the fall of 15. And we really did get chapter and verse and understand that while we do want to freeze whatever capital we can, because we'd already decided to do that just based on the KPMG report alone, but we did get a presentation on why this strategic location in particular should finish out, because it's AODA and state of good repair stuff more than anything, and facilities and real estate was driving this stuff must happen, regardless of what its uses will be. Josie Scioli, yeah.
Okay, any other further questions? Mr. Jeffers? No? Mayor Tory? No. Your further questions?
No.
Yes, I do recall a little bit that, in fact, I did vote for it. And if this doesn't add too much to the cost and we can repurpose it, yeah, I'm willing to accept the recommendation.
Yeah.
So, Councillor Carroll, you want to move recommendation?
Yeah.
Okay. And Mayor Tory understand it, or Mr. Jeffers? Okay, Mayor Tory, all those in favor? Carried. So now we come to item 18. I think Mayor Tory, you may have a conflict on this as well. Yes, we are. Yeah. A is to reopen and consider. All those in favor of reopening? Who's going to move reopening? Councillor Carroll? Mr. Jeffers? All those in favor? Carried. And B is the contract change for paging. Who wants to approve it? Councillor Carroll? Questions?
Yeah, I just have
Microphone. Microphone.
I'm just wondering, I'm just wondering if Tony can unpack the financial implication for me, because I'm not understanding, is the ceiling there? What am I authorizing here?
By going with this contract, you're actually, based on the current number of devices we have,
Yeah.
under the provincial agreement, we can actually save about $100,000 a year by moving to that contract, as opposed to buying directly from Rogers.
But there's still an upset limit on this.
So,
I'm
but
only
we
upsetting.
spend, based on our current, we spend about $600,000 a year right now, and we're hoping to spend $100,000 less with the new agreement.
Right. So we're hoping to spend $100,000 less. You'd never go over.
Well, depending, no, if the number of devices increase, then we could be spending more. But really, this is just based on our current, we've got an agreement, we need mobile devices, and this is what allows us to do that. If we
Right.
move to this new provincial agreement, we can save about $100,000 based on our current image.
Okay, maybe I'm not asking right. What I'm saying is, we're doing that here, but we're not changing the upset limit for mobile devices right now.
No.
When we start to look at what you need for the transformation, you would come back saying, we're looking at new amounts
For sure,
now."
especially when you're
Okay.
looking at the significant increase at that point.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you.
And to speak? Okay, so you want to move it?
I'll move it.
Councillor Carroll, Mr. Jeffers, all those in favor? Any opposed? Seeing none, carried. Okay. Yes, Councillor Carroll, motion to adjourn. All those in favor? Seeing none opposed, carried.